Chapter 185. After the experiment was over, Dake removed the curse cage. The little magical beast felt the preciousness of freedom for the first time. It flew out of the balcony as if it was escaping, desperately breathing in the air of freedom. Because of this, it felt pity for the magic guide fairies. This mentality was maintained until Dake refined the zoo. Although the curse cage experiment was over, Dake did not stop. He took out the magic illusion beast material package that he had saved 2 months ago from the drawer. According to his original plan, he was going to use this material package to repair Magic Illusion Beast, Earbook, in the future. After all, the fur of magic illusion beasts was very precious and rare. But now it seemed that as long as he had enough credits, he could buy it. The Shungmalian Traveler's Street was a wonderful place that was almost illusory. Here, one could buy many treasures that could not be seen in the outside world. Remember, https://mvip can't you? VIP. The castle's unique credit system completely separated this place from the outside world's economy. The merchants of Traveler's Street, especially the material merchants, were in charge of buying things from the students, processing them, and then reselling them in the shops. And when dealing with rare items, they had to follow the principle of only entering, not exiting. Every time a merchant entered or left the Shungmalian, they had to go through a strict inspection to prevent smuggling. And the significance of owning a small shop in Traveler's Street was definitely not in the sense of money. This time, Dake was going to refine another magic illusion beast. Refining a magic illusion beast was very simple for the current him. But before a magister started refining, he would always remind himself that he could not underestimate any refinement. Dake used a few minutes to concentrate before starting to refine the second magic illusion beast. His initial expectation was that he would be able to create another Earbook. If there were 2 ibis, the card deck's error tolerance would be higher, and his true battle strength would increase greatly. But reason told him that the probability of refining another Earbook was very low, almost zero. The final form of the magic illusion beast was affected by the materials used during refining, time, climate, and many other factors. As for the idealistic meaning of it, depended on the magister's expectations. Although it was a large proportion, it was not decisive. Furthermore, a human's thoughts would change even if it was only 0.1 seconds apart. A change in mentality and self-restraint would lead to a difference in thought during the 2 refinements. It wouldn't become an Earbook just because you yelled that you wanted to refine it. Such thoughts only resurfaced in Dake's mind when the magic card on the experiment table turned into a golden cocoon. He began to look forward to what kind of shape the magical fantasy beast would take after it was refined. Half a minute later, Dake reached out and gently touched the golden cocoon with 3 fingers. Then he poured in his magic power. His thoughts flowed into the cocoon along with the magic power. Immediately after, a trace of rhythm could be felt. It was as if some life had opened its eyes in the cocoon. Golden light shot out from the tiny cracks, spreading to both sides and cutting the light cocoon in half. As the light faded away, there was a magic card with a blurry surface lying quietly on the table. The surroundings of the magic card were actually flashing with a golden halo. Dake reached out 2 fingers and carefully picked it up. The originally blurry and transparent outline on the card immediately began to change after meeting his gaze. As the magical fantasy beast's form gradually stabilized, the surprise in Dake's eyes grew. This is card name, Magical Fantasy Beast Multiform Monster. Type, Elf card. Level, Race, Elemental. Attribute, Normal. Magic power, 100. Attack, 100. Defense, 100. Ultimate skill, Shapeshifter Transformation. Not Earbook, but multiform monster. Moreover, among the magical fantasy beast, that was basically a white card, this magical fantasy beast, multiform monster, had 2 ultimate skills. Wait, 2? Wasn't this a gold card? Dake repeatedly confirmed that the halo of the magic card was indeed golden, and couldn't help but feel suspicious. However, he could only keep it in his heart for now and continue to check. There were only 2 sure kill skills on this golden monster of changes. The Shapeshifter ultimate skill was obviously a passive skill that came from the multiform monster's hidden characteristic. Transformation was the only skill of the multiform monster. Shapeshifter. Using transformation. Does not consume magic power. Transformation. Transforms into the opponent's appearance and can copy up to the same level as the opponent's partial data. Able to use the same ultimate skill as the opponent. Should it be a surprise or a shock? Either way, Dake felt that his emotions were a little out of control. He took some time to calm down and then immediately summoned the magical fantasy beast, multiform monster. The polymorph monster that appeared in the light had a soft appearance. It looked like a slightly larger, trash slime. Its body was a light purple color, and its eyes were small like buttons. Its mouth was curved into a small moon. Dake was just about to reach out and touch it when the multiform monster used transformation as soon as it appeared. With the support of the shapeshifter skill, the multiform monster's transformation skill did not consume any magic power. Therefore, under Dake's gaze, it slowly turned into Dake's appearance. Busy the 0.5-meter-tall mini Dake reached out to Dake himself. Dake subconsciously took a step back. The multiform monster seemed to be frightened and suddenly began to melt. Soon it turned back into its original 0.3-meter-tall mucus form. Dake hurriedly went up and picked it up. After coaxing it for a long time and waiting for it to regain its smile, he took out Pride Eye and prepared to open intelligence for it. Dake had always thought that the biggest bug in the Big Sin series of magic cards was open intelligence. However, he still did not know if this effect was limited to the magic fairy that he had refined himself. In short, as the dark golden ball of light entered the multiform monster's body, its body rippled slightly and emitted a pleasant aura. Then, it squirmed and transformed into a mini Dake again. It opened its mouth and said, "Baba?" Dake showed a motherly smile in a daze. Then it was shocked. Although its words were not clear, this multiform monster undoubtedly spoke. Is it because its vocal organs are also simulated to look like a human? Dake touched its head and asked it to quickly change back. After all, it was still very awkward to look at a miniature person standing in front of it. In short, this 100 Faces monster was obviously very different from the real 100 Faces monster in the Pokemon games. This point could already be seen from the information of the ultimate skill that this magic card fed back. The effect of the real multiform monster's shapeshifter characteristic was actually to transform at the moment of meeting, and shapeshifter did not have a level limit. However, the multiform monster that Dake had refined could only copy part of the data of the highest level magic fairy. This part of the data was also very particular. The real multiform monster would copy all the data except for HP. In short, an experiment needed to be carried out. The experimental subject was also ready-made. Dake immediately summoned the little devil beast back. As soon as the little devil beast returned, it found that it was just a new family member, and immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Busy, the multiform monster waved at the little devil beast, and then it transformed into the little devil beast's appearance. It was exactly the same. Even the height and weight were the same. There was a clear difference between this appearance and when it transformed into dark. It seems that the multiform monster's transformation also has two modes. One is the ordinary shape change, and the other is the shapeshifter skill. The latter should only be used on magic fairies. Familiar is more or less a special type of magic fairy. Dake picked up the multiform monster magic card and injected magic power. The face of this card had already turned into the little devil beast's appearance. However, the card name did not change. The three values of magic attack and defense could not be seen for the time being, because the two were originally the same. However, the skill had become Small Dart. Dake waved at the frightened little devil beast, indicating that it could play by itself. Then, it summoned the only 3-star magic fairy in its hand, Kettle. The multiform monster's shapeshifter skill could be cancelled at any time. If it was a normal transformation, there was no cooldown. If it was a skill shapeshifter, the cooldown was 3 minutes. Withdrawing the magic card would cause the shapeshifter to be cancelled. For the magic fairy's ultimate skill, a cooldown of 3 minutes was considered very long. However, for a skill like shapeshifter, it was very short. After 3 minutes, the multiform monster transformed into Kettle. Then, Dake suddenly realized that the number of juicers had doubled. This was obviously good news. It meant that the same amount of juice could be squeezed in half the time. He looked at the multiform monster, magic card again. Card name Magic Beast Multiform Monster. Type Fairy card, level. Race, insect, attribute rock, magic power, 100 attack, 0 defense, 2200, ultimate skill. Sturdy equals strength equal defense power trick, as expected, other than the card name, star level and magic power, all the data had changed. This is not much different from the real multiform monster. The skills are exactly the same as well. 2200 defense is more than enough as an early sacrifice. However, each of Kettle's ultimate skills consumes 100 points of magic power, while the multiform monster only has 100 points of magic power. This is the same as Magic Beast, Earbook's ultimate skill imitation. It's gone after it's used up. If I want to use the ultimate skill in a situation where I can guarantee my survival, I need to use a recharge card like Energy Potion. This is nothing in a real battle, but it's a burden in a duel. Dake seriously considered the generalization of the multiform monster, then took out Pride 2 and Bliss 3. The Pride series and Bliss series magic cards had proven that they were not very effective against Trash Slime, Kettle, and Milk Jar. However, Dake believed that the multiform monster as a magic beast had different possibilities from Trash Slime, Kettle, and other magic fairies. So before the experiment began, he was looking forward to it. He first used Pride 2. The multiform monster's personality suddenly changed, and it became less clingy. However, when he looked at the magic card, he found that only the magic power had become 200 points. No, it's still in the transformation state. Dake suddenly realized and immediately ordered it to dispel the transformation. After dispelling the transformation, the multiform monster's data had a comprehensive change. Card name, Magic Beast Multiform Monster. Type, Sprite card. Level. Race Elemental. Attribute, Normal. Magic power, 200, attack, 200, defense, 200, ultimate skill, Shapeshifter transformation. Just like Earbook, under the effect of Pride 2, the multiform monster became a 2-star monster, and its magic attack and defense all became 200 points. For a 2-star magic fairy, although a 200 points bucket waste was a bit of an eyesore, compared to the multiform monster's initial data, it had doubled. This meant that after it transformed into Kettle, it could release at least one ultimate skill. The change in star level made Dake think of a possibility. Could it be? He suddenly felt a little excited. In order to not let Pride 2 affect his observation of Bliss 3, Dake purposely waited until Pride 2's effect disappeared. Then he immediately activated Bliss 3. Under the pink light, the Bliss emblem appeared in the center of the multiform monster's abdomen, and its data began to increase at a speed visible to the naked eye. Card name, Magic Beast Multiform Monster. Type, Sprite card, level. Race, Elemental. Attribute, Normal. Magic power, 400, attack, 400, defense, 400, ultimate skill, Shapeshifter, transformation, 4-star, 400 points magic power. Of course, this was not the main point. Dake immediately inserted a bit of magic power, and then received the information of the ultimate skill. As expected, transformation's target range is still a magic fairy of the same rank. This means that after using Bliss 3, the multiform monster can transform into a 4-star to 6-star magic fairy. Furthermore, although 400 points of magic power does not seem to be a lot, it is enough to use many skills. Immediately after, Dake summoned Fairy Earbook to do an experiment and discovered that this was indeed the case. In addition to being excited, he also felt a little regretful. If he had used Bliss 3 Mooner previously, he would have been able to enjoy the fun of Fairy Earbook X3. In general, Magic Beast, Multiform Monster, was the third gold card in Dake's hands. Perhaps it had a huge flaw, but with the enhancement of the Great Sin series of magic cards, it was indeed a gold card. It was a fruitful harvest. It was a pity that although Magic Beast, Multiform Monster, and Little Evil Magical Beast were first-tier magic fairy cards, they were only 1 star. They had plenty of potential, but their attributes were not good. Sometimes, they could not be compared to 2-star or 3-star magic fairy cards. Dake still lacked 2-star and 3-star magic fairies that could fight head-on. Then, how could he create the 2-star or 3-star magic fairies that he needed? Dake was deep in his thoughts. 2 and 1, 4 out of 100 begging for monthly votes. After that, some black impurities overflowed from the surface of the card and gradually covered the magic card. 2 minutes later, the magic card finally stopped reacting. Dake took out a tool and carefully scraped off part of the black impurities that covered the magic card. He then used a pair of tweezers to rinse it under the tap for a moment. As more than half of the stains on the surface were washed away, the corners of the magic card were exposed, gradually emitting a blue glow. It's a blue card. Dake's heart skipped a beat, and he revealed a look of joy. Of course, he would not fantasize about a gold card. As long as it was not a white card, it was already a huge profit. After a while, Dake placed the washed magic card on the table and observed it carefully. The pattern on the card was not the harpy he had imagined, but the eagle wrestler. That was more like an eagle. The eagle wrestler was a type of Pokemon. It was less than a meter tall when it stood up. At first glance, it looked like a wrestler wearing an eagle's helmet. Its face had a blue-green mask-like pattern, and there were 3 orange feathers on top of its head. It spread its wings red on the outside and green on the inside, like a cloak. It was quite handsome. It's a 3-star card. Card name, Eagle Wrestler. Type, Elven card. Level, *****. Race, bird/beast. Attribute, fighting/flying. Magic power, 1100. Attack, 1500. Defense, 1200. Ultimate skill, Feather Dance. It's a very standard 3-star blue card. A full 1500 attack power is a bonus. The ultimate skill is Feather Dance. In the original work, it was a skill that could directly reduce a person's attack power by 2 levels, but it's obviously different here. Feather Dance. Scatter feathers around the opponent, blocking their attacks. In short, it was a good skill similar to a smoke bomb. The usage of this ultimate skill was obviously not limited to scattering it on the opponent. If used well, it could be used as a control skill to block the opponent's line of sight. At this point, Dake was already very used to the fact that the magic fairy he refined was biased towards Pokemon. Not only was he not surprised, but he also began to look forward to the next magic fairy. In the world of Pokemon, what would a Pokemon based on a mermaid be? Minus? No, it seems to be based on an oarfish. Of course, he did not immediately start refining the next magic fairy. Instead, he first summoned the Eagle Wrestler and did some experiments. Pride I, Pride 2, Bliss 3. After using the 3 Great Sin cards one by one, Dake put the Eagle Wrestler back into the card. It could not be said that he was disappointed. The Eagle Wrestler was originally a Pokemon that did not have the potential to evolve. Perhaps using more precious materials could refine a higher star level Eagle Wrestler, but using the Great Sin cards would obviously not allow it to evolve further. However, this was also in line with Dake's initial expectations. A 3-star magic fairy that could fight head-on. Got it. The second experiment began in full swing. Dake quickly completed the preliminary steps and advanced to the final step of throwing in the materials. This time, the core material was naturally the mermaid's scale. Dake carefully threw the mermaid's scale into the light emitted by the first refining array. As the scale was swallowed by the light, he retracted his hand, carefully observed it, and then put it in his saliva. However, this time, the light of the refining array was still flickering. At this time, if there was envy, Dake would definitely put it in. However, he only had a little pride left, and it was still in the insect branch. What should he do? Dake's gaze began to wander. That teddy bear button eye was definitely not going to work. Putting in more than 2 cores was a big taboo for basic refining. Then he could only add in some supplementary materials. And the supplementary materials that he could casually take out really did exist. Ding! Dake's eyes flashed, and his gaze stopped on the 3 cat plants waiting to be stroked. These 3 different types of cat plants, one had bred the pride fruit, and the other 2 had bred the bliss fruit. After the fruits ripened and were not plucked away, The thin stems of the fruits were left on their heads. The 3 thin stems that looked like a hoe became the meat in Dake's eyes. When it comes to mermaids, other than envy, there is only bliss. And there are 2 bliss fruit roots here. Dake immediately walked over and carried back the first cat plant that pounced on him. Then he caught the second fox plant that pounced on him and stretched out the evil scissors on its head. Gotcha. Fox grass called out softly. It felt as if it had lost something important, and it felt a little empty. So it leaned closer to Dake's arms. But the cruel and heartless Dake abandoned it after using it and turned his target to the cow plant. Gotcha. Moo. The cow plant was at a loss. Dake, who had obtained 2 bliss roots, quickly went back and forth and threw one of them into the light of the number 1 refining array. As the refining array swallowed the thin stem, the light gradually stabilized. But it was not enough. Dake immediately put in the second thin stem. As expected, the light became stronger and stronger. The entire refining array began to operate at high speed. The materials that were thrown in were fused and digested by the refining array, and the process of extracting the essence and removing the impurities began. Some black and green impurities were expelled. The more essential things were retained. It was another familiar scene. As these impurities that came out of nowhere were expelled, the entire refining process was unusually smooth. Dake could not help but show a look of anticipation. The basic refining method actually had a failure rate and it was quite high. However, he succeeded 3 times. He did not know if it was the credit of the saliva, or if he was really born with good luck. After the refining of the magic card was completed, Dake cleaned it and found that it was actually a 2-star purple card. What was displayed on the card was an exceptionally cute sea lion cub. This sea lion had smooth blue skin, a pure white mouth, a shaking beard and a pink ball-shaped nose. There was a light blue collar around its neck, a pair of forelimbs and a tail fin at the front and back of its body. In short, it was super cute. Card name, Ball Sea Lion. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race Bird Beast. Attribute, Water. Magic power, 500 attack, 700 defense, 300 killing technique. Moist voice, charming voice. Compared to the Harpy Man, Dake obviously liked this Ball Sea Lion more. Although it was only 2-star, as one of the 3 families of the Pokemon Sun and Moon chapter, the Ball Sea Lion had an extremely huge evolution potential. Ball Sea Lion, Rippling Sea Lion, West Lion Sea Run. The final evolution form, West Lion Sea Run, was a Pokemon that was based on the mermaid. From the data panel, the 3 measurements of the Ball Sea Lion could only be said to be average among the 2-star Pokemon, very similar to the 2-star Earbook. However, as a purple card, it had 2 skills. One was the passive skill evolved from the hidden characteristic, Moist Voice, and the other was the fairy skill, Charming Voice. Moist Voice. All sound moves become water attribute. Charming Voice. Make a charming voice and inflict mental damage to the opponent. Every magic sprite had its own attribute. Under normal circumstances, when using the killing techniques of other attributes, the power would be greatly reduced. Only by using the killing techniques of its own attribute could it be fully unleashed. Moist Voice was similar to Fantasy Beast, Fairy Earbook's Fairy Skin. It was a passive skill that converted other attributes into its own attribute. However, Moist Voice did not have any additional power. It was a pity that the only killing technique, Charming Voice, was not very powerful. Even after it was converted into a skill of its own attribute, there was nothing to write home about. As Fairy Earbook had Charming Voice, Dake was not unfamiliar with it. However, without Charming Body as a base, Ball Sea Lion could not unleash the charming effect of Charming Voice. This was truly regrettable. In the evolution chain of the Ball Sea Lion, both the Ball Sea Lion and the Rippling Sea Lion were pure water attributes. Only the final evolution form, West Lion Sea Run, had additional fairy attributes. This meant that the evolution of West Lion Sea Run would most likely require the Bliss series of magic cards. However, that was already the 2nd evolution. Before that, Dake needed to figure out how to make Ball Sea Lion evolve into Rippling Sea Lion. The Pride series of cards obviously would not work. The Bliss series of cards had some possibility. However, envy was the first choice. Envy's symbol was Mercury, and its attribute was bias towards water. It was a great sin that was perfectly compatible with the mermaid. However, Dake still summoned Ball Sea Lion, and used 3 great sin cards one after another, treating it as spiritual intelligence. As expected, the first 2 Pride cards did not have much effect. Although the Bliss 3 card triggered some phenomena, it could not promote the evolution of Ball Sea Lion. There was also no sign of Illusory Beast, Ivan rising in stars. Clearly, Fantasy Beast, Ibu was special. Like Fantasy Beast, ever-changing monster. Any type of great sin card would work on it. Momo. Alright, touch. Dake was a little helpless as he dealt with the blissful Ball Sea Lion. He temporarily put aside his thoughts of cleaning up. That was the end of the day's experiment. He had gained a lot. Dake looked back and suddenly realized that he had cultivated Curse Cage, Fantasy Beast, Ever-Changing Monster, Falconer Wrestling, and Ball Sea Lion in one day. A total of 4 magic cards. It could be said that he had spent a very fulfilling day. It could be considered as a good preparation. With these 4 magic cards, his card set was further improved. When he signed up for the Duel Club next year, he would be able to perform better. The only magic cards left are Fusion and Zoo. There's still a long way to go for Zoo. I can try Fusion as soon as possible. Whether it succeeds or fails, I have to take this step. I'll treat the 1,500 credit materials as buying experience. I wonder when Senior Sister will be free. 2-in-1 4,000 words. Chapter 187. In the blink of an eye, it was already the last week of the first semester. On Wednesday of this week, after the students handed in their final big homework of the semester, they suddenly relaxed. It was Wednesday afternoon. The second class in the morning was the last summoning class. Professor Shi Erfu explained clearly what to do during the holiday. Because there was only a short 1-week and 2-day holiday, there was no homework assigned during this short holiday. This made the students who had worked hard for a semester laugh as they walked on the road. And because the Shungmalian castle was located in the outskirts of the kingdom on the surface, it was very far from the center of the kingdom. Therefore, only a small number of students could complete a round trip in these 9 days. But if they spent most of their time on the road, it was obviously meaningless. So very few students chose to go home. But unlike the students, even if the professors didn't go home, they would still want to go out for a walk. They had all kinds of needs. After Friday, a large number of professors would leave the castle. Professor Claire was one of them. Of course, she wouldn't take the slow magic car. Remember the website, MVIP can't you? 6 It would take at least a week to go from the castle to the capital, including changing stations and other needs. That was really too long. Claire was always riding a dragon. And for creatures like dragons, even if it was a tamed flying dragon, it wouldn't let anyone other than its master sit on its back. Fortunately, Dake didn't want to hitch a ride from the beginning. The first Christmas with the students in the academy would be a very important part of the little mage's learning life. According to statistics, there were no more than 5 first-year students who chose to go home at this time every year. The weather was getting colder. Even the school uniform with the function of keeping warm was gradually useless. The students began to add scarves around their necks and put on all kinds of gloves. And scarves and gloves had become the rare decorations that didn't violate the school rules. The girls couldn't change out of the damn school uniform. So they thought of ways to change their scarves and gloves to make themselves more beautiful and tasteful. Every time the little demon flew outside the castle, it would proudly think, "Among all the magical spirits, only I, the little demon, have scarves." 2:00 in the afternoon. Dake met with the senior at the entrance of the library. They had made an appointment the previous night to find the lab that afternoon and research the making of the fusion card together. Senior Panduola had experience in making fusion, but she had only managed to make 3 of them, and she had failed many times. This showed how difficult it was to refine fusion. Dake had long given up hope of success. If it weren't for the fact that he wanted to take this opportunity to understand Chen Yushan better, he would have continued to study her for a few months before making his move. However, Personally, experimenting was actually a good way to speed up learning. It was just that the cost was a little high. Senior, have you handed in your homework too? Yes. Panduola looked relaxed and happy. It seemed that even the silver dragon girl could not withstand the killing power of the big task. She added, I'll be free until Christmas. Only a few times a year. Dake asked curiously, what about after Christmas? Panduola, I'm going on a long trip. Why did he say that it was a long trip? Because Shungmalian was her home. His only home. Dake did not ask why she was going out. Instead, he changed the topic back to school. For example, he casually asked her when she started working part-time as a librarian. Panduola told him that it was the second month of the first year, when Traveler Street was first opened to the first years. When everyone was pulling each other and running to Traveler Street, she stayed in the library all day and was noticed by Ms. Bella. Ms. Bella was really a kind person. Every time Panduola mentioned her, there would be a hint of admiration on her face. Dake could tell that she respected Ms. Bella as a mother. This made him realize very quickly, Chen Yushan's background was not good. She probably did not have any relatives. Before trying to understand her, Dake did not feel a trace of sadness from her. Was that a manifestation of strength? Or was it just a facade? Or was it just because he did not really want to understand her that he did not notice it? This was very different from the impression that Chen Yushan Panduola had always given him. The more Dake understood her, the more he felt that he was really shallow. Women always seem to have a delicate softness hidden deep in their hearts. They were used to wrapping a layer of steel around their soft hearts. There was more than one woman with such a personality around Dake. Panduola Doragon was only 15 years old. Her opportunity to enter the Shungmalian came from an invitation to school. There were basically two ways to enroll Shungmalian students. One was active. The other was passive. Every summer vacation, the school would take the initiative to look for children with high magic reactions. These children who exceeded a certain magic index would easily trigger the magic runaway phenomenon if they did not receive the correct magic education. This phenomenon was once called the sign of the birth of the devil in ancient times. The children who triggered this phenomenon were labeled as the son of the devil and would be executed. Dake Demung was actually one of the victims of this phenomenon. The culprit of the magic runaway was the second princess Anna. This was the biggest reason for the deterioration of the relationship between the two sides. Among the first-year students, many students were actively recruited by the school. Otherwise, with their family background, they would not even be able to come into contact with the Shungmalian. The other passive method was the so-called application for school. Many students of the aristocratic academy were admitted through their parents' application, and then after a test. The school would charge a certain amount of tuition fees according to the family background of these students. On the surface, the school would also accept donations. Of course, compared to the enormous amount of teaching resources of the Shungmalian, the donations were completely inadequate. The school itself was an unusually large economy, and they relied on themselves to make money. On one hand, opening a school was a tradition that had been passed down since ancient times. On the other hand, among the students that Dake was more familiar with, Luo Boat, White, and Luo Si were all actively recruited by the school. Ai Ma, Sarah, and Deanna were applications that their parents helped them submit. Even if the applications were not submitted, the three of them would still receive invitations. Also, Dake himself was also one of the people who were actively recruited. If it were not for the invitation that suddenly flew in, he would still be in the Duke's mansion, exposed to the cold wind. The Duchess wanted him to enter the school 1 year later. The reason was that he was mentally incomplete. In other words, Mother is worried. There were basically no classes on Wednesday afternoon, but most of the students preferred to stay in the common room with the fireplace. In the castle where no one was passing through, the cold wind blew gently. Dake and Panduola came to the laboratory that they had borrowed in advance, inserted the key, and unlocked the door. The unique smell of the laboratory hit them in the face. Dake went in first, and then quickly prepared for the experiment. Panduola asked, "Have you finished writing the fusion spell?" Dake said awkwardly, "There were some obstacles." Panduola laughed. If there are any problems, just say it. Our main goal this afternoon is to adjust the fusion spell to a usable level. It's harder than you think. Dake replied. I'm already mentally prepared. That being said, but Panduola was not someone who would teach you how to flap your wings and how to run. She was more like an eagle who would throw a baby bird off a cliff to learn how to fly. You still had to do everything yourself. She would only give you some pointers at crucial moments. The more complicated the spell, the more things needed to be involved. There were a lot of links that needed to be analyzed and filtered through experiments. Through the experimental reaction, he could determine whether each incantation, and even the usage of each charm was correct. It was indeed much more difficult than Dake imagined. Because he had successfully written a usable, spell cage spell, he took it for granted. The difficulty level of the two was completely different. And once they were immersed, neither of them was in the mood to chat. It was soon 6:30 in the evening, and the sky outside was already dark. They had not even started the experiment yet. Dake packed up his tools and said, Senior, I'll treat you tonight. Panduola asked curiously, Treat? In the cafeteria? Dake smiled mysteriously and pointed up. What did it feel like to stand on top of a castle? It was hard for people who had not experienced it firsthand. Oh, Dake opened his arms and welcomed the wind. Other than the spiral clock tower, this was the highest place in Shangmalian. Now that Professor Didi had resigned, few people would be so free as to climb to the top of the clock tower to look around. The probability of them being discovered was reduced to the lowest. Standing on top of the castle and looking down, although the entire castle could not be seen, it was the perfect immersion that made it even more magnificent. Shangmalian castles were an art that had been passed down since ancient times. From the structure, decorations, and reliefs of the castle, one could almost find traces of every era. Dake was immersed in it, and almost forgot about the girl beside him. Panduola reached out and pressed down her hair that was blown away by the wind, but she did not care. Not long after, the little fiend holding a basket with its claws and flapping its wings hard appeared in sight. This enchanting scenic spot was actually discovered by the little fiendish magical beast. It had nothing to do, so it liked to lie on this high place and roll around. Pandora couldn't help but cover the corner of her mouth when she saw how hard the little monster was working. Is this your familiar? Dake nodded proudly. Panduola also summoned her familiar. It was a cute little dragon with 2 small wings. Its big belly made it look like a western dragon, but if one looked closely, they would find that it was just an eastern dragon with a round belly. It was just a little short. Go. Panduola pointed at the little dragon's belly, and it reluctantly turned its head and flew towards the little fiend. With the help of the 2 familiars, the heavy basket full of tools and ingredients was finally pulled up. Dake took the basket and took out his tools to skillfully assemble it. This was a set of barbecue tools borrowed from the halfling chefs. The vegetables and meat in the basket had already been cut and washed. They were all handled by the halfling chefs with smiles on their faces after hearing his explanation. Dake did not know if there were any students before him who had done this before, but at least there were no legends of them in the academy. He quickly used his magic to ignite the small magic stove, and the flames from the stove licked the bottom of the barbecue grill. Looking at Panduola, who had a look of reminiscence, Dake took the opportunity to ask, Senior, have you ever made barbecue? Panduola pursed her lips and said, I have. In the wild, barbecue is the simplest method that can be done without tools. There was no fluctuation in her tone, but it made Dake's expression stagnate. He braced himself and asked, Is it a trip in the wild? Panduola chuckled and said, It's to survive. People couldn't be lumped together. Dake used to think that even if his barbecue skills were not the best, they were above average. But not long after, he became an existence that was only fit to serve as an assistant. The little fiend monster did not even look at his finished product, but focused all its attention on the barbecue in Panduola's hands, saliva dripping from the corner of its mouth. A rich aroma was constantly emitted. Panduola displayed heart-wrenching cooking skills. In the eyes of outsiders, she was supposed to be a young miss who did not do any household chores. Smoke rose in spirals and people were everywhere. After eating and drinking to their fill, they lay down on the ground. The moon in the clouds, the shadow in the moon. The winter night sky was as clear as a jade. Two people, two demonic spirits, just lay there quietly. Dake had a lot of questions to ask, but he did not ask them. Panduola's eyes were already blurred, as if she was entangled by thoughts. 9 o'clock sharp. The biological clock rang in her heart. Panduola glanced in the direction of the clock tower, pressed down the hem of her school uniform, and slowly got up. It's time to go. Okay. Dake also moved. He turned around and picked up the little fiend monster that had started snoring at some point. Enchanters were truly wonderful creatures. They did not need to eat or sleep. Yet he could eat and sleep. Dake held it like holding a baby, and his other hand picked up a basket full of tools and kitchen waste. Then he went downstairs with the senior. Walking in the quiet castle, both sides tacitly did not make a sound. It was as if they were walking side by side in a long history, and it was a little intoxicating. Panduola would sometimes suddenly turn, and Dake would follow. Along the way, they did not encounter a patrolling golem. When they reached the second floor of the castle, Dake sent her to the bridge of the Magic Academy's tower. Panduola walked across the bridge in a few steps, and turned around at the other end of the bridge, one hand pressing down on the hem of her skirt, the other hand gently stroking her hair, and revealed a bright smile. I'm very happy tonight. Me too. The two waved at each other. The moonlight was very beautiful. 2 and 1 4000. Chapter 188. Back in the dormitory, Dake put the little beasts on the bed, covered them with a blanket, and went into the bathroom to take a shower. The hot water flowed down, gradually waking him up. Looking back on today, in addition to the inadvertent increase of bliss, his research on fusion spell deepened. In the next 2 days, he needed to seize the time to continue his research and perfect the last bit of the spell. If he could finish the writing by noon on Friday, he could ask his senior sister out to conduct the first experiment of fusion card refinement. He planned to decide on a Christmas gift for her after that. Drip. The sound of water dripping gradually stopped. Dake walked out of the bathroom, comforted the 3 catnip plants, got into bed, lay down and read for a while. Remember in 1 second. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. When his hair was naturally dry, he gradually fell asleep. The next Thursday, Dake came to the common lounge as usual. When winter came, the magic flame in the fireplace would not go out for a long time. The common lounge was always warm, and there were more and more students who liked to stay here. Dake sometimes came a little late, and found that there were already 2 or 3 people reading books and newspapers inside. But in the early morning, everyone was not in high spirits and would not casually talk. Today's Great Sage Daily was still focused on Christmas-related topics. But it rarely mentioned the Shungmalian Academy. Perhaps because the Halloween incident did have some negative effects, the Academy was trying to avoid being a topic. On the other hand, the Academy of the Sacred Sect almost occupied most of the pages during this period. Christmas, as the name implied, was to celebrate the birth of the saint. The so-called saint was God and also human. In the scriptures of the Sacred Sect, the saint was the first human. His name was Saint, and he was one of the oldest gods. Before his arrival, there was no human in the world. After his arrival, the first human appeared in the world, which was himself. He was the beginning of human, and also the root of human. He was the ancestor of all human beings in the world. The most core theory in the scriptures of the Sacred Sect was the theory of God and human. It meant that human beings were the descendants of God, and the blood of God flowed in everyone's veins. Based on this theory, the theory of human supremacy was established. It meant that other than the gods, the race with the noblest bloodline in the world was the human race. Therefore, the saint was a firm believer in the pure-blooded humans. It opposed all foreign races and foreign hybrids, and its discrimination against subhumans was deeply rooted. It believed that subhumans were an inferior species that only deserved to crawl under the feet of humans. During the war, in order to jointly resist the powerful demon race, the humans and the subhumans signed the 100 Races Alliance Treaty. The saint was the biggest opponent. But as the war situation worsened, the Holy Church was forced to swallow the humiliation and sign the alliance treaty that was extremely humiliating to them. So as soon as the war was over, there was a public clamor for tearing up the treaty in the Holy Church. This was one of the reasons why the Holy Church was able to reach a consensus with the Eagle faction led by Prince Charles. In comparison, the Shung Malian Academy's attitude towards the demi-humans was very friendly. It could be said that it was completely opposite to the philosophy of the saint. Many of the professors in the academy were even subhumans or hybrids. The conflict between the two sides was almost irreconcilable. This year's Christmas, the Holy Church would unite with the Academy of Mystics to hold a large mass in the church. At that time, the prince would lead a group of nobles to participate and use this to promote their common position. The afternoon. In the last 10 minutes of the history of magic, Claire told the students about the uncertainty of her next itinerary. If I don't decide to come down, then today may be the last time we see each other. Her tone was very flat, and there was no special nostalgia, but the students were obviously more excited. Most of them thought that she would continue to teach until she took over the position of the Dean of the Fool. After all, she was so suitable. Professor, did we not satisfy you? A student from the Academy of Magic raised his hand. Claire was a little surprised by her question and couldn't help but laugh. No, you are all excellent, except for a few students. Several students who were once turned into pigs suddenly lowered their heads. Claire said softly, "It's just that everyone has their own itinerary. Some people like to stay in one place for a long time, and some people are not suitable to stay in one place for a long time. The Shung Malian is just one of the stops on my itinerary. I haven't decided yet. It seems that I will stay for a long time." A student from the Academy of Fools immediately raised his hand. "Professor, will you attend this year's Christmas?" Claire shook her head slightly. "I'm sorry I can't spend a warm Christmas with you here. I still have someone to accompany. She's crying because she can only spend Christmas alone this year." Dake covered his forehead. Saraswati from the Academy of Magic raised her hand and said, "Professor, I like you very much. I hope you can stay." Claire smiled slightly. "I like you very much too." Sarah immediately sat down with a blush on her face. AI Ma from the Academy of Knights immediately raised his hand. "Professor Kate, if you don't come next semester, who will replace you?" Claire thought for a moment. "I didn't ask Erdii, but I don't think she will disappoint you." During the many questions and answers, 10 minutes passed in the blink of an eye. When the bell rang, Claire waved to the students, not leaving a single piglet behind. Dark quickly picked up his bag and followed her out the door under her secret signal. The classroom was in an uproar because of this unexpected news. Walking in the wide hallway, Claire said, "I'm leaving at noon tomorrow. How's your gift?" Dake nodded. "It's ready." Claire said, "Send it to my dorm that night. Don't worry, I won't peek." Dake's face darkened. "If you didn't mention it, I wouldn't have thought that you would peek. Should I use Morse code to translate it when I go back?" he asked. "Aunt Claire, are you sure you don't want to reconsider?" "Claire, I'm going back to think about it." Dake pursed his lips, knowing that this matter was probably over. Her hesitation meant that deep down in her heart, she didn't have the determination to stay. Even if she stayed under Yvette's suggestion, it wasn't a decision she could make on her own. Dake didn't want Claire to make a choice against her own will just to take care of him. It seemed that he really had to add something in that letter. He just didn't know who the professor of the history of magic would be next semester. After pondering for a moment, he asked, "Will you continue traveling?" Claire glanced at him and smiled. "I'm going to take a break for 2 or 3 years. If I don't come back to teach next semester, I'll stay at your place." Dark heaved a sigh of relief. Claire continued, "Right, I've already stored your Christmas gift in Erdii's place." It was time to figure out the character designs and illustrations. Chapter 189. The two separated at the fork in the road. Dake returned to the dormitory and went to Claire's office with the gifts before nightfall. Sure enough, Claire was in the office, worrying about how to tidy things up. Her office wasn't messy, but there were a lot of books. Many of them were borrowed from the library, and they needed to be returned one by one. Some of them were bought from Travelers Street, and if they wanted to take them out of the academy, they needed to go through a review process. However, with Claire's status, she must have gotten permission from the principal of Earbook. Let me help. Dake put the gifts aside for the time being, and began to roll up his sleeves to sort them out. Claire, who was still acting like an adult not long ago, couldn't help but blush. She sighed in her heart about the passing of time, and didn't reject it. Half an hour later, the website was https://m. But can't you? VIP Dake sorted out the books marked by the library. He summoned the Diru beast, and had it carry the books to the library. Claire took the rest of the things and left the office. Although Dake came to the library less frequently, he was still familiar with every corner here. He had the Diru beast move the small mountain of books to the counter. Then he explained the matter to Senior Panduola, and they registered the books together. Every time Panduola finished registering a book, she would use her authority as an administrator to drive the magic circuit of the library and send the book back to its original place. As the books grew wings and flew away, the pile of books on the counter became shorter and shorter. Both sides had room to speak. Panduola exclaimed, "Are these the books that Professor Kate borrowed? She borrowed 1 or 2 books every day, and I didn't expect there to be so many. I really want to know if she has a special way of reading books." Dake said, "Maybe she is a sage." Panduola, "How is your fusion spell going?" Dake, "I did some fishing in class and made some progress, but it's still difficult." Panduola, "It's normal that it's difficult. The fusion curse is one of the hardest curses to overcome even in our 4th grade courses. It's already very rare for you to make such progress." Dake shrugged. "Maybe it's because my computing power is especially strong." He didn't learn advanced mathematics for nothing. Panduola was also curious. "I always feel that your arithmetic skills are better than mine. Did you come up with the vertical calculation method and the mnemonic table?" Dake, "It's just a small trick." After sorting out the books, Dake said goodbye to his senior, and went straight to Claire's dormitory. However, as soon as he opened the door, he found that it was full of animals jumping around. Dake touched his forehead. He always felt that if Aunt Claire was unreliable, even Yvette would have to step aside. She had obviously opened the venue card for the zoo in the dormitory, but there were obviously too many animals that were released to unpack her luggage. The animals were doing everything they could to compete for her attention. There were even 2 monkeys that were tugging at the sleeves of a piece of clothing. Dake originally wanted to help unpack, but he didn't expect that there were already too many people inside. "Looks like I don't need help." Thus he closed the door and wanted to run. "Don't." Claire's cry for help came from inside. After most of the items were unpacked, the two went to the cafeteria to have a relatively sumptuous dinner. Dake let go of his appetite and gave Claire enough face despite the gluttony +1 prompt. "Eat more. You can only grow taller if you eat more." Claire kept putting food in his bowl, but she didn't eat much. Although it wasn't particularly obvious, Dake still felt that the feeling she gave off was decisively different from when she first came to the castle. She came like duckweed, but when she was about to leave she had roots. It was a very hazy feeling. But in short, it was changing in a good direction. Dake wasn't so worried. After drinking and eating to their heart's content, they went their separate ways. Claire needed to hurry up and visit the professors of various subjects. Dake also had his own research to do. The winter night was cold, and the moon was bright, and the stars were few. Dake studied on the experiment table until nearly 10 o'clock and finally made some breakthroughs. He breathed a sigh of relief and went to the balcony. He bent down to pick up the milkweed that rubbed against him and looked up at the moon. 1 or 2 bats flew across his field of vision, which made him a little surprised. There were bats in the castle, but as the winter got longer, the bats should be less active. But that was the habit of ordinary bats. There were also some special bats that didn't follow this rule of hibernation. His thoughts left as soon as he touched it. Dake didn't pay too much attention to it. He turned his gaze slightly and looked in the direction of the teacher's dormitory. Having such a family member in the academy gave people a very different feeling. Although the night of learning the prerequisite knowledge of zoo with Claire was busy, the feeling of being compact and fulfilling was easy to form a habit. After a week of suspension, he felt a little empty. It seemed that he had lost the race against time. He shook his head and held back the growing sense of loss in his heart. What a coincidence. Claire was also looking at the castle under the night sky from the balcony of the dormitory. Her expression was absent-minded, but her eyes were focused on a certain area. If one studied the terrain of the castle, they would find that it was an area where the secret passages were concentrated. Only those who had gone deep into the secret passages knew that there was a space-folding phenomenon in the secret passages. The actual unfolded area was larger than the entire castle. Claire had also gone deep into the secret passages. But she didn't have the childlike innocence of the hero and the Valkyrie. She didn't leave the so-called treasure in the secret passages. But at that time, their exploration of the secret passages was still superficial. They only knew that the secret passages were magical, but they didn't know that the secret passages could be magical to this extent. Halloween. The resurrection ceremony of the moon goddess. Even if this matter had been published in the newspaper, there were still very few people who could see the details of it. Claire agreed to Erdei's invitation because she wanted to find a place to calm down. And also because of this. In these years of traveling, even if the beautiful scenery and cultural customs of various places were admirable, the hole in her heart was not filled after turning those experiences into pictures and drawings. Instead, it became deeper and deeper. This led to several irritable outbursts. It really caused a little trouble. Claire's mouth curved slightly. The days when she came to the academy did calm her down. She also had some clear goals. It was what she wanted to do. It wasn't what others wanted to do. The dead were dead after all. The survivors had to continue living. People couldn't always live in the past. Sorry, Peter. Chapter 190. Late at night. Silence. Waking up from a dream. Morning. The Shungmalian welcomed the last day of the first semester. The weather was good on Friday, and the sunlight brought a hint of warmth. Professor Cheong-si didn't talk about the difficult theoretical knowledge in the dual class anymore. She waited until all the students had gathered at Battle Hall 2, and then picked out a student from each branch to be the foreman. She then had the students line up in 4 rows, and then followed the foreman out of the battle hall. Last class. Professor Cheong-si was going to lead them to run around the outside of the castle. It was also to let these first-year students, who locked themselves in the castle all day long, breathe the air outside the castle and understand how big the castle was. Remember the website, VIP, can't you? Six-Dake glanced at Ai Ma, Sarah, and so on his right. Ai Ma and Sarah's faces didn't look so good. It was already difficult for them to keep up with the running team. Now that they were picked to be foremen, wasn't that a public execution? Dake and the foreman on the far right of the House of Fools signaled to each other and slowed down their pace. The 4 columns moved forward at a relatively slow speed. Professor Cheong-si didn't rush them. The area outside the castle was unexpectedly vast, and all kinds of small buildings were scattered around. Some of the first-year students liked to look outside the castle, but not many of them actually went to the site. If they had the time, more people would choose to run directly to Traveler's Street. We're here. After a while, Professor Cheong-si stopped somewhere. The students followed her gaze and looked in the same direction. Then a 2-story building in the style of a Roman palace came into view. What's that? Someone asked in surprise. Then a student who already knew answered, that's the entrance to the underground city. The Shungmalian underground city was a multi-story structure like a large maze. The underground city refreshed monsters every other week, and was only open to some students from Friday noon to Sunday night. Most of the Shungmalian's core materials came from here, and it could be said that it was completely self-produced. Study, adventure, duel. These were the 3 indispensable elements in the daily life of the senior students. As a first-year student, he could only come into contact with learning. Next semester, your magical beasts teacher might bring you to the dungeon for a tour. Professor Cheong-si stopped there for about 10 minutes before he started moving again. Let's continue. Thus, the students sighed and continued to run. The last class of the first semester of the first grade came to an end amidst the endless running laps. Dake managed to preserve his dignity as a noble, by relying on his morning exercise to improve his stamina. He looked down at most of the students who were bent over and panting, further strengthening his determination to persevere in the morning exercise. Before the class ended, Professor Cheong-si talked about some safety matters during the holidays, and then announced that the class was dismissed. At that moment, even though their legs were sore, the students instantly cheered. For students who had no concept of the length of the winter break, a 9-day break was simply too crazy. What's more, it included the Christmas ball. Even though the Christmas ball didn't have a hunting activity like the masquerade ball, everyone still had a Christmas stocking to look forward to. For them, who had already experienced a hunting event, the Christmas event with the element of a ball, as the core, was even more attractive. It was December 22nd, and there were only 2 days left before the Christmas ball on the night of the 24th. The focus was on a dance partner. This time, the focus was on Christmas presents. The thought of not having a dance partner at the ball, or not receiving any presents other than a stocking, made them feel awkward. The little mage's gazes gradually sharpened. Next, it was war. Ouch, what's going on? Dake touched his cheek and felt a stinging pain. Who was it who was using a sharp gaze to carve on his face? Unlike the other students, after the duel class ended, Dake went straight to the dorm to continue researching the fusion spell. Since he made a decisive breakthrough last night, the research became a little smoother. When it was almost midnight, he stopped to eat some takeout brought by the little fiend and immediately went out. He finally arrived at the dragon taming platform before Professor Claire set off. The dragon taming platform was located near the classroom dorm. Despite the name, it was actually a place similar to a helipad. When the professors entered and left the school, most of them would ride flying pets. Most of the professors' pets were their own magic elves, and a small number of them were like Claire, who had tamed real magic beasts. Claire's wyvern was a subdragon species with thin dragon blood. It was originally the mount of a small leader in the Demon King's army, but it later became her trophy. When Dake arrived at the dragon taming platform, Claire was saying goodbye to a few familiar professors. Therefore, he didn't approach but stood a little further away and watched. After this farewell, the next time they met would probably be during the summer vacation. Dake was a little sad. Hey Dake. Dake suddenly became alert. He saw Claire waving her hand vigorously. He quickly smiled, raised his arm, and waved vigorously. Auntie Claire, goodbye. A strong wind blew. Soaring dragon cloud. Claire put on her goggles and flew into the sky on her wyvern. Professor Shi Erfu, who came to see her off, used the key card in his hand to draw a circle, and a circular door appeared in the sky. Claire suddenly turned her head as she passed through the door, and her light brown hair fluttered in the wind, covering half of her face. Dark watched until her figure completely disappeared from his sight. Then he took a small step back and turned to leave. Since it wasn't a life and death separation, there was no need to be too sad. Yvette was alone and needed companionship. With Claire's addition, the Duke's mansion would be warmer. Every time Dake flipped through the Great Sage Daily, he didn't have to worry too much about news that was unfavorable to his mother. He quickly returned to the dorm and continued to immerse himself in perfecting the fusion spell. After another 2 hours, Dake finally came up with a fusion spell that looked decent. Phew, he drank a glass of apple juice to refresh himself, then quickly packed his things and went to the library. Panduola also had her own things to do, and this afternoon was the last chance before the Christmas ball. When he arrived at the library, Panduola said a few words to Ms. Bella beside her. She walked out of the counter under Ms. Bella's warm gaze, and went to the laboratory with Dake. The corridor of the castle was still quiet. Dake curiously asked, "Senior, do you still have work?" Panduola shook her head. "I also have holidays, okay? I just came to accompany Ms. Bella." "Well, I'll wait for you." Dark scratched his head. He had a nagging feeling that if he prepared a Christmas present for Ms. Bella, Senior Pandora would be happier. They didn't have much time this time. After the two entered the laboratory, they immediately got to work. Under the guidance of Panduola, Dake first tested the fusion spell. After he felt that all the indicators were met, he began the experiment. The first half of the fusion spell was actually somewhat similar to the spell cage spell. Both required the creation of a magic elf card as a base. The essence of fusion was equivalent to using 2 or more magic guide fairies as the core material to refine a brand new magic guide fairy on the spot. It could be said that it was a type of on-the-spot creation. Therefore, using the fusion card required a huge amount of magic power. Therefore, there were very few people who used the fusion series of cards. Ordinary magisters would at most use fusion as an auxiliary method, not as a core method. The whole experiment started at 3 in the afternoon and lasted until 4:30. The experiment's results were not unexpected. It ended in failure. As he was already quite mentally prepared, Dake didn't feel discouraged. The summary of the experience and problem-solving after the experiment's failure was the focus of this afternoon. Dake definitely couldn't do these by himself. However, with the careful guidance of Panduola, everything went smoothly. An hour passed in the blink of an eye. Although Dake didn't fully understand, he had already taken notes of all the key points. Next, he had to rely on himself to continue reading books. He gradually relaxed and began to tidy up the remnants of the experiment. After tidying up, the two left the laboratory together. Dake originally wanted to invite Senior to a restaurant in Traveler's Street for dinner, but Senior regretfully said that she had something to do in the evening. Therefore, the two went to the cafeteria. Under the meaningful smiles of the halfling chefs, they ordered a small table of dishes in the corner of the cafeteria. Then, Dake discovered that Senior was also a carnivore. Her taste was on the sweet side, and she likes salty and sweet flavors. If it's sweet and sour pork ribs, vinegar carp, and fish-flavored shredded pork, she should like it, right? This thought flashed through Dake's mind. In fact, that was also his favorite flavor, and he would more or less make some. However, it was a little undignified to use food as a Christmas gift. She wasn't a little foodie like Deanna. The table manners of this world actually didn't encourage talking while eating. However, as long as it wasn't a formal occasion, it wasn't that particular. The two ate while talking in a low voice. Panduola was very interested in Dake's timidity from time to time, so she asked him about his childhood. However, what interesting things did Dake have when he was a child in this world? He lowered his head slightly, looking a little embarrassed. Panduola became more and more interested. Dake really didn't want to talk about his past life's experience in this world, so he tried to change the topic. You can't keep asking me, right? Senior, what about you? Panduola smiled mysteriously. Have you heard of Dancing with Wolves? Of course, Dark had heard of it before, so he nodded honestly. Panduola then talked about her childhood experience. Yes. Under the moonlight, she stepped on the wolf's head and danced with the wolf. After Dake heard this, he couldn't help but open his mouth with a look of astonishment. Panduola covered her mouth and smiled like a lady. Panduola's appetite was bigger than Dake's. However, the nutrients flowed to where they should go. Dake felt that she and Deanna should have something in common. Although this dinner wasn't as lively as Wednesday night, as long as both parties were happy, it was the best dinner. Panduola wiped the grease at the corner of her mouth with a napkin and whispered, "Don't forget our agreement." Dake nodded slightly and couldn't help but ask, "So we'll meet at the ball next?" Panduola replied, "Yes. I have to prepare for a trip in these 2 days." "Dake, where are you going?" Panduola smiled mysteriously. "I'll tell you when I come back." Dake was 12 years old and 1.59 meters tall. Panduola was 15 years old and 1.68 meters tall. The two were 3 years apart in age and 9 centimeters in height. Dake had just started to develop, and felt that it wouldn't be a problem to catch up. Although Pandora was considered tall among the girls, she was still in the puberty stage. Therefore, it was still unknown who would win and who would lose. They walked side by side and chatted about daily topics before parting at a fork in the road. They were both smiling. But not long after, Dake couldn't smile anymore. He realized that he still hadn't thought of a Christmas present. Instead, he was looking forward to what Senior's sister would give him. He shook his head. Dake pushed open the tower door of the aristocrat house. A gust of warm air immediately hit him in the face. After he entered, he quickly closed the door. He saw that the common lounge was full of people. On the first night of the long vacation, There were so many students in the 6 grades of the aristocrat house. Except for a few who chose to go home. They were either in Travelers Street or in the common lounge. And there was a clear line between men and women. With the fireplace as the dividing line, the men's territory was near the door, and the women's territory was on the other side. Both sides defended their positions and eyed each other covetously. As soon as Dake entered, he saw a senior holding a letter and trying to break through the girls' formation. In the end, he fled back dejectedly amidst the laughter of the crowd. Not long after, a girl mustered up her courage and walked towards the boys' camp. She was welcomed by the boys. The difference in treatment between men and women was so obvious that it made people cry. However, the senior boy who received the girl's invitation politely rejected it. The girl grabbed the invitation and ran back while covering the corners of her eyes. What's going on? Dake looked at it for a while and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He scanned his surroundings and found the first years, Doran and the others, trembling in the corner. It was obvious that, like him, it was their first time experiencing such a situation. There was actually such a custom before the Christmas ball in Shungmalian? Dake frowned slightly. Suddenly he noticed that Deanna and Luosi were winking at him from the girls' camp. They even stuck out their tongues playfully. From the looks of it, they were the chicks that were being protected. And the senior girls were the female birds that protected their young. If one wanted to invite the junior girls to the ball, they had to first go through their scrutiny. This was 2F** King. Interesting. 2 in 1, 4,000 words. Chapter 191. Dake glanced at the stairs between the male and female positions. He felt that going upstairs at this time would ruin the atmosphere. So he greeted Deanna and Luosi and turned to the corner where the male students were, where Doran and the others were. The ratio of male to female first-year students was close to 1:1, so there were only a dozen or so first-year boys in the corner. There were probably still a few of them in the cold wind on Travelers Street. "Hey Dake, you're finally back." As soon as he saw Dake, Doran hurriedly waved his hand. Dake smiled and squeezed into the crowd. A student moved his bag aside to make room for him. "When did it start?" Dake whispered. Doran was like a spy who had infiltrated the enemy's camp. He said sneakily, "It was like this when we came back from dinner. At that time, the atmosphere was more anxious than it is now. It was like a war. We didn't dare to say anything." Dake. "Then what are they doing?" Doran. "I think it's called Operation Protect the Chicks. It's organized to prevent the junior students from getting carried away by the romantic atmosphere of Christmas." Dake. "Isn't that a good starting point?" Doran. "I heard that it was like this at the beginning, but something happened later that changed the atmosphere of the operation." Dake. "What happened?" Doran. "Isn't it embarrassing to have no dance partner at the Christmas ball?" So a senior student didn't want to lose face. He specifically went to find a junior girl who had some feelings for him. In the end, as soon as the ball ended, he dumped her. The girl couldn't take it anymore and almost jumped off the castle. It caused a big sensation. Dake was surprised. There was such a thing? Doran looked around and whispered, "It's true, but it's a little different from the rumors." Dake. "What do you mean?" Doran. "Actually, the female lead of that incident is a cousin of mine. She just graduated a few years ago. With her tyrannical temperament, how could she jump off a building? It's already good enough that she didn't throw that senior off the building." Dake had a strange expression. "So, it was actually that senior who jumped off the building?" Doran. "It's like this. In short, this matter has developed to this point. It's no longer clear who is the perpetrator and who is the victim. Operation Protect the Chicks has also gradually changed. No matter which boy it is, he will be kicked out. Ugh, I wanted to find a girl to cooperate with, but now there's nothing I can do." Dake blinked and said, "Look on the bright side. Aren't the others unable to find a dance partner as well?" Doran, the other hand. Doran immediately clapped his hands, said, "If no one has it, then it won't be embarrassing." Wonderful. Just as they were talking, a girl in the female camp stood up under the encouragement of a senior. The girl had a rare pink hairstyle, and her skin was fair and rosy, as if it was moist. On her slightly round face, Her facial features were especially delicate, and her eyelashes were especially long. She had a timid look, as if she would cry if she was poked. "Isn't that you, Dora?" Doran was astonished. Eudoron was the youngest girl among the first-year students of the Noble Academy. She had actually just turned 11 years old, and was sent to the Shungmalian Academy in advance because of the phenomenon of magic power losing control. Doran's good friend, the little fatty Pittan, whispered, "I didn't expect Eudoron to be so bold. She dared to act with so many people watching her. If it were me, I would definitely wait until tomorrow morning to secretly." Doran: "No, I want to know who she has taken a fancy to." Dake teased, "Maybe it's you? Look, she's looking this way." Hearing what he said, Doran suddenly became nervous. His ears turned red at a speed visible to the eye, and he quickly shook his head. "No way, I haven't even spoken to her." The little fatty Pittan patted him on the shoulder and said with relief, "Brother, everyone gets lucky sometimes. Eudoron is a good girl." Doran suddenly realized that Eudoron seemed to be really walking this way. He was suddenly a little stunned. Although he usually didn't pay much attention to her, now that he took a closer look, Eudoron was really cute. If she's really here for me, should I say yes? But does she really like me? Woo. Seeing Doran become like a young girl, Dake couldn't help but smile. The pure love between junior boys and girls made people want to give their blessings. But the gap between the two sides was really big. The girls' camp didn't allow boys to get close, but they encouraged their girls to bravely express themselves. The boys' camp, on the other hand, could only accept it passively. They were completely in a state of disunity. A few senior students who seemed to be very popular also looked as if they were watching a show. In short, Eudoron walked into the pack of wolves with a shy face, and then she really walked over to this corner. She even stopped in front of this table. She lowered her head and clutched an invitation letter hard, her toes trembling slightly. The scene suddenly quieted down. Doran was so excited that he almost couldn't keep up the serious expression on his face. So when a man chased a woman, it was as easy as a layer of gauze for a woman to chase a man. Doran clearly didn't care much about Eudoron, but as long as Eudoron took the initiative, he wouldn't be able to hold on. Many of the first year's boys revealed envious expressions. There were even some who gritted their teeth, wishing they could tear him apart. Doran, on the other hand, wished he could immediately snatch the invitation letter from Eudoron's hands. Hello, I'm Eudoron." Eudoron suddenly spoke up. She said softly as if she was introducing herself. She still lowered her head and didn't dare to raise it. Her moist face was red. "Hi." Doran was a little at a loss and wanted to respond. Eudoron suddenly raised her hand and handed over the pink invitation letter with a heart and a Christmas tree pasted on it. "My name is Dew." Doran's voice suddenly froze. Like a rusty robot, he turned his neck will that had been in disrepair for many years. His gaze followed the extension of Eudoron's arm. "Dake. Opa." In the girls' camp, a pitiful glass fell to the ground. Luosi was shocked and hurriedly took out a towel to help clean up the water stains on the ground. Although the glass was broken, there weren't many pieces. It was just that it scared people. Deanna squatted down in a hurry. For a moment, she wasn't in the mood to watch over there. Luosi couldn't help but grumble. "You're too careless." Deanna pouted. Luosi continued. "Didn't you help send a lot of replies on Halloween?" Deanna: "That's true." She suddenly became active. Dake and Eudoron had never said a word. How could he agree? The princess wasn't causing trouble for the ball this time. Steady. Chapter 192. Dake looked at the envelope in Eudora's hand awkwardly. It wasn't that he hadn't rejected anyone before. However, it was quite hurtful to reject a little girl in public. The seniors seemed to think that they could support the juniors by putting on such a formation, but in reality, once they were rejected, it would only be even more awkward. Just like the girl who was welcomed in by the boys and ran out crying. Wasn't this a public execution? Dake actually didn't like this kind of behavior. Private matters shouldn't be put on the table. Of course, if it was just watching, he could still watch with relish. However, this involved himself, so it felt different. People always had double standards. However, He still had to reject what he should. Website. https://mvip can't you? VIP there was no other way. I'm sorry. However, just as Dake said that, Eudora suddenly stuffed the envelope in her hand into his hand. Then, she said forcefully, you don't have to apologize. As long as you can take a good look at my letter, it's fine. After saying that, she raised her head. Her eyes revealed a determination that was different from her soft appearance. Dake was slightly stunned and didn't open it on the spot. Eudora didn't rush him either. He said helplessly, I'll take a look. Eudora suddenly bowed and said, thank you. Then the little girl with the pink doll head lowered her head again and turned to escape. Dake held the envelope in his hand and frowned slightly. This invitation that was slightly different from what he had expected attracted a lot of attention. However, because Dake had clearly rejected it, it didn't cause any topic in the end. Dake sat down again. Dolan, who was beside him, quickly regained his composure as if nothing had happened just now. He hid the awkwardness deep in his heart. Little Fatty Pitten didn't have so many scruples. He poked his head out from behind Dolan and asked softly, Dake, could this be a confession letter? Dake put the envelope into his bag and frowned. Maybe. Whether it was an invitation letter or a confession letter, it didn't matter, because the result was the same. Look. Luosi nudged Deanna's arm and pouted. Deanna smiled. As expected, she rejected him, right? This action, which seemed interesting at first glance, but when you put yourself in his shoes, you would feel rather speechless, was still going on. Eudora was the first to deliver a letter to Dake, but she was by no means the last. Doran sat in the center seat, but he could only stare blankly as he watched Dake receive more and more dance invitations. It was as if all the first-year girls had discussed it, and came up one after another to challenge the difficult missions. In the end, even the girl who came to deliver the letter was no longer nervous. Instead, she smiled and stuffed the letter into Dake's hands. Dake maintained the smile on his face, but his heart was gradually becoming numb. From the serious treatment of Eudora at the beginning to the swift rejection now, it had really gone through a process. Other than him, all the other first-year boys were lying on the ground like they were dead. Dolong asked weakly, Hey Dake, how many times has it been? Dake, 16. Doran. How many are left? Dake, 2. Doran. There are a total of 18 first-year girls in the aristocratic academy. There are only 2 left, right? Deanna displayed her smug mental arithmetic and snickered. Luosi also smiled. Among this batch of aristocratic academy students, Dake Dimming stood out. As long as one's gaze accidentally shifted to him, it would be difficult to look away. He was like a black hole, absorbing all the light. Compared to him, the rest of the boys paled in comparison. For example, a boy like Doran, who was originally considered outstanding, couldn't receive any attention. This could only be said to be the sorrow of the times, the loss of morality, and the distortion of human nature. In a few years, when the girls' minds were more complete, they would probably look away from that dazzling halo. Luosi glanced at the students beside her. At first, they still had some sense of competition, but now that everyone was rejected, they laughed and played with each other. After all, they had common hobbies, and had topics to talk about. The feeling was not so much falling in love with the same person, but rather pursuing the same idol. What made Luosi a little worried was that Eudora, who was the first to confess, she seemed to be different. At about 9 o'clock, this farce gradually dissipated. There were successes and failures. There were happy and sad. Dake carried 16 letters and returned to the dormitory with heavy steps. Behind him were the first-year boys' piercing gazes. It wasn't so exaggerated on Halloween. He rubbed his forehead and felt very tired. Fortunately, as soon as he opened the door, he saw the cute kitty grass at the door to greet him. He picked up the kitty grass and saw the milkmaid grass dozing at the door of the balcony. The kitty grass was still lying on the windowsill and squinting at the world. The kitty grass was still the best. Slurp. Dake rubbed his face hard against the kitty grass's cheek. He finally relaxed after sucking the kitty grass's nutrients. Then he summoned Kettle, squeezed a cup of apple juice, and finally began to read the 16 letters. First was Eudora's letter. He opened the pink envelope decorated with hearts and Christmas trees, and took out the letter paper that emitted a faint fragrance. He slowly unfolded the folded letter paper. He first scanned it from top to bottom, and then read it carefully. I know that you have never paid attention to me, even though we are always in the same classroom. The distance between you and me is like walking from the beginning to the end of a muddy river. I don't expect to receive a response after one confession. After all, there is a big difference between us. I'm not good enough for you now, but I'll work hard to make myself more outstanding. You are like the eternal sun in my heart. Even in this winter, the cold can't dispel the warmth you emit. One day, I will also become the warmth in your heart, and use the heat of my body to feed your light. I am yours, Dake. After reading the letter from beginning to end, Dake tried hard to recall the external impression Eudora gave people, but only a pink doll head appeared in his mind. So this child's personality? On the surface, this letter seemed to be quite progressive, but the dangerous aura between the lines was almost overflowing. It's too difficult for me. He had no choice but to put Eudora's letter in the upper left corner for the time being. Then he picked up the next letter and continued to read. This second letter was finally a normal invitation to the ball, which made him slightly relieved. Out of courtesy, he would write a reply. Chapter 193. With the experience of Halloween, Dake was familiar with this kind of reply. He took out the spare letter and gave the other party a formal response, telling her that he was honored to receive her invitation, but he had an appointment in front of him, so he could only regretfully give up. Then there was the third letter, the fourth letter. There were also 1 or 2 confession letters from girls, but they were all very normal. Dake told them to focus on their studies. The ignorance of youth might make you misunderstand some emotions that you have never felt before. That might not be love. True love should be precious, and something that could be relied on for a lifetime. It shouldn't be easily entrusted to others for the sake of so-called romance and yearning. Otherwise, it wouldn't be strange for one to be heartbroken when looking back at the end of one's life. You can't just fall in love with someone on the surface. Remember the website, MVIP, can't you? It was almost 10 o'clock when Dake finished writing 15 replies. He waved at the little fiend beast, and asked it to send the replies to the students one by one according to the names on the envelopes. The little fiend beast muttered as it flew out, bringing back a trace of cold wind when it went out. Dake took Eudora's confession letter again, thinking about how to get this child back on the right track. Regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, when they were young, their minds were immature, and they were easily influenced by others. It was difficult to escape the attraction brought by the charm of one's appearance. When one grew older, it was easy to distinguish whether one liked the appearance of a person or the person. Just like before Dake had a deep contact with Senior Panduola, he only liked her appearance, not her person. He wasn't the kind of person who would talk about things like love when he didn't have any social interaction with her. Therefore, he didn't quite understand why Eudora could produce the kind of passionate emotions expressed in words. It can't be that you've been reading too much of those innocent young girls' literature, right? Dake poked his cheek with the pen. At this time, he should be seriously studying the problems left behind by fusion. Why don't we not reply? Although cold treatment isn't brilliant, it's better than the opposite effect. Maybe when she calms down, she can figure it out herself. Knock, knock, knock. Is the little fiend beast back? Dake turned to look at the door and got up to open it. He really did see a little demonic beast. However, Deanna and Luosi came with him. Both of them were wearing furry pajamas. One was a bear, and the other was a bunny. Both of them exuded the fragrance of shower gel. Can I go in? As Deanna said this, her little head was already peeking under Dake's armpit. Good evening. Luosi raised his hand shyly and shook it. Dake let Deanna in and said helplessly, "Come in." After Little Bear, Little Rabbit, and Little Devil had all gone in, he closed the door again. Hee. Ever since the first time they came here, Deanna and Luosi had been going to Dake's room more and more frequently. They were no longer as reserved as before. As soon as Deanna entered the room, she saw the Christmas presents piled up in the corner of the room. She couldn't help but want to try them. However, her attention was quickly drawn to the letters on the table. Dake pulled out 2 chairs for them to sit down. He poured 2 glasses of juice and asked, "Why are you here so late?" Luo Si held up the silver glass filled with pear juice, as if it was a treasure. He smiled and said, "If I don't come, someone won't be able to sleep." Deanna's face turned red, and her eyes started to wander. Dake nodded slightly to show that he understood. "Go ahead." Deanna mumbled, "I just want to ask if there are any plans for the Christmas ball." Dake, "Yes there are." Deanna, Dake said helplessly, "I already have a dance partner, Senior Panduola from the library." Deanna was stunned. She said subconsciously, "Dake, so you like dancing?" Dake couldn't help but smile. "She gave me a lot of advice on my research. Besides, it's just a ball." "What?" Deanna wasn't happy. "Why is it always like this?" Luo Si was also very surprised. She originally thought that Deanna was in the bag. After all, Dake didn't show any intention of being too intimate with any of the girls. The 2 of them were undoubtedly the closest to Dake. If Dake wanted a dance partner, he should have chosen between the 2 of them. However, she didn't expect that a senior would suddenly appear out of nowhere. However, when she thought about it carefully, Senior Panduola was indeed very charming. She probably had a lot of admirers in the school. Dake actually made an agreement with Senior Panduola without any signs. She really didn't expect this. Luo Si couldn't help but think of a sentence in a book. Outstanding people are always easily attracted to each other. Deanna was still not outstanding enough. She sighed slightly. She just didn't know how to comfort the childish Deanna next. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but look at Dake with a pleading look. However, Dake just shook his head slightly. He said to Deanna, "This Christmas ball is divided into the first half from 9 to 10, and the second half from 11 to 12. If you are willing, can you be my dance partner in the second half?" Deanna almost immediately came to life. She suddenly opened her eyes wide and looked at Dake. She raised her head and said, "Really?" Dake couldn't help but scratch the bridge of her nose. "Of course it's true." Deanna wanted to cheer, but she quickly covered her mouth and laughed. Lady. After leaving Dake's dormitory, Deanna walked as if she was floating. She whispered, "Luo Si, do you think the first half or the second half is better?" Luo Si thought for a while and said, "The first half is good. However, in the second half, you can spend the last moment of Christmas Eve with your dance partner at the stroke of 12 o'clock. Deanna said, "Then the second half is better." Hee. Luo Si said, "Okay, go to bed early. You have to keep a good complexion." Deanna said, "Okay." After Dark sent the 2 of them off, he let out a sigh of relief. The first half of the Christmas ball was actually the home court. Although the second half was more meaningful, people's energy was limited, and their interest would gradually fade. Whether it was the first half or the second half, it was impossible to dance forever. It was normal to accept other people's invitations in the middle of the dance. In the second half, most people might not be in the banquet hall anymore. That meant that when it was almost 12 o'clock, they might come back to dance with him. Deanna was so easy to coax. He was so lucky. Even Chun Yushan knew that she would be there. Well, it should be fine, right? It was just a dance. Dake didn't take the Christmas ball too seriously. On the other side, in the teaching room, as the clock pointed to 10 o'clock, White and Luo Boat's confinement punishment was finally over. After wishing the instructor a Merry Christmas, they took their school bags and ran back to the Night Academy's tower. "It's finally over, Luo Boat." "Yes, we have 9 days of vacation. We are finally free." Under the moonlight, White and Luo Boat's eyes were filled with tears. But when they pushed open the door of the tower, they were stunned by the Christmas atmosphere that greeted them. The common room of the Night Academy was no different from that of the Aristocrat Academy, except for some differences in decorations. On the first night of the holiday, the Night Academy held a small celebration that didn't start until 10 o'clock. Many people even threatened to stay up all night. The atmosphere of the Night Academy was more unrestrained than that of the Aristocrat Academy. In the corner of the common room, senior couples could be seen everywhere. The people gathered in the middle were even having a magic chess game. White and Luoboat were both very interested in magic chess. But it wasn't until now that the two suddenly realized that Christmas was really coming. "Hey Luoboat, what do you want as a present?" White asked. Luoboat shrugged. "How about a turkey leg? And I'll give you a turkey wing in return." White. "Okay, I'll think about it." The two closed the door to stop the wind from blowing in. And they deliberately didn't mention the Christmas ball on Christmas Eve. Luoboat. "The Christmas ball is different from the Halloween ball. It seems that it's hard for juniors to find a dance partner." "Hey, didn't you say you wouldn't mention it?" White hurriedly changed the topic. Luoboat, how about a game? "I can't even remember the last time we played magic chess." Luoboat gradually became excited. "How can one game be enough? Let's fight until dawn." No matter what happened, everyone had their own way of living. White actually cared more about the Christmas ball than Luoboat, but he was in a strange state of inferiority and didn't dare mention it at all. When he thought about the ball, he could only comfort himself that there would be plenty of time in the future, and there would be a chance next year. But this Christmas gift still had to be given. If he could use this opportunity to leave a good impression in front of his senior from Panduola, it would definitely be worth it. But how should he choose this gift? Forget it, let's play a game of magic chess first. The next morning. Perhaps it was the holiday effect, but Dake rarely slept late. He picked up the cat grass that was licking his face and put it back in the sleeping basket. He yawned slightly and got out of bed. The winter sun shone through the gaps in the curtains and reflected mottled shadows on the floor. Dake opened the curtains and looked outside for a while. He didn't know what he was looking at, but he stood there in a daze for 2 minutes. Then, as if he suddenly woke up, he turned around and went to the bathroom. He washed his face, combed his face, and tidied his hair. A holiday should be a holiday. Dake didn't plan on solving all the problems from last semester during the holiday. He picked up a book called Claire's Weekly Travels and sat on the deck chair on the balcony to read it. When the little devil placed bread, bacon, sausages, eggs, and milk on the stool next to him, he began to read and eat. "This kind of life suits me." It wasn't until after breakfast that Dark put down a section of Claire's Weekly Travels and picked up today's Great Sage Daily. It was only 2 days before Christmas. After the Holy Church announced that they would hold a large mass with the Holy Church's School of Mystics, the princess also announced that on Christmas Eve, she would personally pray for the people at the Hero Square in the royal capital. At that time, there would be a large number of small gifts given for free in the Hero Square. Faith or free gifts, which one is more attractive? Dake read this and couldn't help but laugh. Although the conflict between the Hawk faction and the Dove faction had gradually surfaced, the two factions had their own concerns and had stopped at such small skirmishes for the time being. If you put yourself in the perspective of a bystander, sometimes it would be quite interesting. Afternoon. Dake went to Traveler's Street again. From that day onwards, there were suddenly many pairs of people on the street. The Christmas decorations were all over the place, and there were Christmas trees with colorful lights everywhere. Cute magic elves were flying in the air, holding signs to attract customers. Dake occasionally caught a glimpse of White and Luoboat in the crowd. Thinking that they had finally escaped from the hell of confinement, he couldn't help but feel happy for them. The Christmas ball was different from a masquerade ball. If you wanted to appear at the ball, a formal outfit was necessary. Therefore, all the clothing stores in the clothing district were overcrowded. Students might not be able to find a regular dance partner before the ball, but they still had a chance after the ball began. For a long time, there were many men and women who successfully held hands in the atmosphere of the ball. The prerequisite was to have a formal outfit. Dake looked at the crowded crowd and couldn't even find a gap. He couldn't help but feel lucky that he had bought the Night Prince costume before Halloween. Bonus point for Deanna. Then he went to the small garden in the middle of the street and watched a magic circus for a while. The clowns in the circus controlled all kinds of magic elves to carry out an extremely clever performance. The superb control skills made the magic elves' movements without any delay, as if they were completely real life. Dake watched and couldn't help but intertwine his fingers together. He finally had an inspiration. I'll give that. After deciding on the Christmas gift for Panduola, Dake didn't stay in Traveler's Street anymore. He began to buy some necessary items for the adventure according to his plan. He wasn't completely without plans for the 9 days of vacation. Christmas was only secondary. It was a rare vacation, and he wanted to use this opportunity to explore the secret passage for a longer period of time. It was also time to find the treasure that the Valkyrie left in the secret passage. Although he didn't have a strong desire for the treasure, he was quite curious about the treasure itself. He had asked Claire about this before, but Claire only smiled mysteriously and told him that the reason why treasures were treasures was because they were full of surprises. Wouldn't it be less fun if he knew what was hidden inside from the beginning? Dake said that he didn't care. Claire didn't talk to him anymore. After returning to the dorm, Dake completely calmed down. He spent about 3 hours on the problems left by fusion. After that, he relaxed and began to read some books. In the blink of an eye, the moon fell, and the Shungmalian welcomed the last night before the Christmas ball. Some people were looking forward to it. Some people couldn't sleep. Some people secretly made up their minds. The bats that were active all over the castle seemed to have suddenly received some kind of call. They quietly flew into the upper level of the castle and disappeared into the entrance of the secret passage. Everything was brewing. 2-in-1 4,100 words. Chapter 194. Sunday, December 24th. Sunday was the most special day of the week. It was both the Sabbath and Sunday. Worshippers usually attend church services on this day. Since it was Christmas Eve, thousands of families went to the church to pray for everyone's safety. Even though the kingdom's holy church supported the Eagle faction, this did not stop the believers from yearning for peace. After experiencing the baptism of blood in the demon race's war, the current peace seemed rare and precious. The wisdom of the people grew rapidly in the war, and they could see the so-called gods and beliefs relatively clearly. They would not be blinded. Most of the low-level believers went to the church for a peace of mind, not to believe in some god they had never seen before. After all, when they were in danger, the one who saved them from the abyss of suffering was not some god. Instead, they were heroes who rushed to the front lines and fearlessly sacrificed themselves. Remember in 1 second https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP The Shungmalian Academy was the most famous production base for heroes, and the reverence it received had actually surpassed that of the saint. It was just that the Shungmalian Academy was not open to the public, and there were no churches set up in the various towns, so there was no place for people to worship. It couldn't be helped. This was life. Since he couldn't get close to the best, he could only comfort himself with the second one. After all, there were a few heroes in the Saint Church, right? The Saintess of the battlefield, who had inherited the title of Joan of Arc, was one of the more famous ones. Amidst the fragmented prayers, the kingdom ushered in a new day. It was the same for the Shungmalian. After finishing her daily prayers, Sister Ka Lian picked up a coat and draped it over her shoulders. The backlog of work over the past few days was finally completed yesterday. From today onwards, she would also have a holiday, if she was lucky enough. Unfortunately, according to the usual pattern, there would be a few loopholes every Christmas. So much so that she didn't dare to drink to her heart's content at the ball. However, she had come prepared for this year's Christmas ball. She had specially prepared a hangover recipe. As long as a dose of sobering medicine was administered, no matter how drunk one was, they would instantly sober up. Even if the price was double the drunkenness afterwards. She yawned and prepared to take advantage of her free time to go to Traveler's Street and buy a few small gifts. She usually hid in the infirmary and didn't socialize much, but now she couldn't hide anymore. Teachers often exchanged gifts with each other, especially the few professors who stayed in the academy. They were Professor Lili, Professor Kazair, and Professor Shierfu. They were all homeless people, so they had to huddle together to keep warm. Otherwise, how could they survive the cold winter? Speaking of those professors, Lili was drunk again last night. He was lying on the sofa like a dead pig. He probably wouldn't be able to get up until the afternoon. Professor Kazair and Professor Shierfu were busy preparing for the Christmas ball. Professor Shierfu was in charge of the specific arrangements for the ball, while Professor Kazair was using the Holy Grail to make a one-time use Christmas stocking. Come to think of it, Professor Kazair was really pitiful. He was responsible for more than 80% of the ghosts on Halloween. The 1,000 socks for Christmas were all made by him. However, in Shengmalian, he only received the salary of an ordinary professor. Tragic. In the early morning, frost had already appeared on the buildings, and thin pieces of ice had also appeared on the lake. As the temperature of the sun gradually rose, the frost melted, and the Shengmalian Academy gradually regained its vitality. The students began to walk out of the tower one after another. All of his previous savings and preparations would be decided tonight. In the dormitory of the Aristocrat Academy, Dake was still reading Claire's weekly travels. This book was unexpectedly interesting. Although Aunt Claire was like that, her writing style was more humorous and relaxed. When she wrote the story, she drew pictures of every scenic spot. It could be said that she was very attentive. The process of reading this book was like following her footsteps and walking through thousands of mountains and rivers. It was hard to imagine that one could walk such a long journey alone. The relaxed and humorous writing couldn't hide the tiredness of the journey. Not to mention the dangers in the deep mountains and wild forests, and the ferocious bandits and thieves. Dake suddenly felt that he shouldn't have given her that bottle of Bahuang wine. Perhaps he should have bought her a whole set of cosmetics. Of course, Claire herself would definitely like that bottle of wine more. 48 hours passed in the blink of an eye. He didn't know if Claire was home yet. Perhaps tonight on Christmas Eve, she would light a candle on the dining table and taste a bottle of hot red wine filled with the smell of blood on the battlefield with Arvet. Another afternoon passed. Dake packed up and prepared to go to battle. From the bottom of his heart, he liked this kind of youthful holiday atmosphere. However, if he had too much contact with it, sometimes he would get into a lot of trouble in interpersonal relationships. The entrance to the Christmas ball was at 7 p.m. The location of the ball was still the same hall during the division ceremony. The students would occasionally call it the Great Hall, or Banquet Hall. Different from Halloween, because there were no masquerade activities, and most of the professors were no longer in school, the school was not strict about the time of the Christmas ball. If you wanted, you could even enter the Great Hall at 5 or 6 p.m. Tonight's ball didn't have a guest like the princess, but it was said that the magic circus that performed in Traveler's Street was invited. Although the little magisters could also summon magic guiding fairies, the magic guiding fairies in the circus always gave people a refreshing feeling when they directed them to perform. At about 6:30 p.m., Dake had just changed into the Prince of Night costume when he heard a knock on the door. He pushed the black crow mask that was no longer useful to him to the corner of the table. Then he straightened his collar and went to open the door. "Good evening, ladies." The moment he opened the door, he gave the most standard gentleman's salute. Deanna at the door was slightly stunned. Then she happily reached out her hand. "Good evening, Dake." Dark took her hand and tapped it on the palm of his hand that was wearing a black lace glove, causing her to giggle. Luosi suddenly showed a look of disappointment. Only then did Dark raise his head and look at the two women who were dressed to the nines. As expected, Deanna had changed into the Princess of Night costume. It was a black velvet princess dress that matched Dake's outfit very well. The skirt that was supported by the dress had a particularly fluffy feeling. The exaggerated decorations and cute frills of the dress were definitely not something that ordinary people could wear. Deanna's silver hair was neatly combed. At first glance, it was obvious that it was Luosi's handwriting. The expensive hair accessories on the side of her head made her look more dignified and noble, and less childish. The thin crystal high heels slightly made up for her height that was slightly shorter than her peers. Deanna's personality was usually too outstanding, so people often forgot that her maternal bloodline came from the royal family. Although she was only a distant relative of the royal family, her soft silver hair still revealed an untouchable nobility. The 12-year-old Deanna, after carefully dressing up, actually had the feeling of a beauty. Dake's eyes immediately turned to Luosi. Different from the sergeant's outfit at the masquerade ball, Luosi also changed into a dress that matched her temperament. She obviously preferred a clean and pure white color. Her body, which was taller than Deanna's, moved up and down with the help of the corset. Her waist became slender, and the skirt that was supported by the dress was like a blooming flower. The multi-layered design gave a strong visual impact. Luosi, who chose flat red dancing shoes, was about the same height as Deanna when she stood up, so there was no contrast. It seemed that she had been careful not to cover up Deanna's brilliance, but her natural beauty was not something that could be covered up by these small details. She inherited the light blonde hair from her noble parents, which made her look like a real princess. Even if Anna and Anchi were here, they could not completely take away her brilliance. Different from the timid Shengmalian when she first came here, Luosi was obviously more open. This was not only due to Deanna's influence, but also because there was a young boy in their small circle who gathered all the brilliance. Although it did not sound like a good thing at first, it was the truth. No matter where one was, the level of one's circle had a very important impact on one's mentality and the perception of the outside world. The small circle formed by the three of them was undoubtedly the best among the first-grade students in the aristocratic academy. Deanna, who was careless, did not notice it. Luosi, who was attentive, could always see the color of envy in the eyes of her classmates, which made her feel better. Therefore, she always felt that she was lucky to have met Deanna and Dake. Her smile became brighter and brighter. Dake looked away, feeling slightly lucky. Fortunately, he was not the same as he was in the past. After going through the training of Senior Panduola and the cute attack of the catnip grass, his mind was now firm enough, and he would not casually trigger the prehistoric force. The time is just right. Dake locked the door and walked to the entrance of the corridor. Luosi quickly pushed Deanna's arm, and Deanna reacted and quickly reached out to hold Dake's arm. But she was obviously not used to the thin high heels under her feet, and her body leaned over. Dake reacted quickly, and after taking a step back, he reached out and held her hand. It was small, and it emitted heat. Deanna blushed and smiled shyly. Then she took Dake's arm and walked downstairs. Dake did not care, and only glanced at Luosi. Luosi winked at him, indicating that she could go alone. The three of them walked to the common lounge one after another. At this time it was an awkward time. Many people were still chatting and stalling for time in the common lounge when they happened to see the three of them. One would get used to seeing a golden boy and a jade girl after seeing too many of them. But tonight's meeting was a little different. The students of the Aristocrat Academy had left an impression on the 16 invitations the night before. When they saw Dake and Deanna walking together, they suddenly realized that the final winner was here. Especially the first-year girls who had been rejected on the spot. They looked at Deanna with envy. They muttered something like, "The pavilion closest to the water gets the moonlight first," and gestured to their chests. Then, they all revealed dejected expressions. They were all of the same age, so why? Eudora was reading a book in the corner. Her grades could only be considered average. Although there seemed to be only a year difference between 11 and 12 years old. Her mental growth was different day by day. She actually could not keep up with the progress. But fortunately, she worked hard enough. "I'm still young." Glancing at Deanna's chest, Eudora expressed that she still had potential. As for the fact that she didn't receive a reply the night before, that was within her expectations. She didn't know that she was the only one who didn't receive a reply. After all, no one would publicize this kind of thing. Moreover, they had already been rejected once on the surface. Dake's reply seemed to be sincere and polite, but for the girls, it was also a second rejection. He didn't have any relevant experience in his previous life, so he was still negligent when it came to emotional matters. The moment when Dake's group pushed open the door became an opportunity. The students in the common lounge also stood up and walked out one after another. The light emitted from the door illuminated the bridge. Every student who walked through it could feel an additional sense of ritual. The Christmas ball had already begun in their hearts from here on. It would take about 5 minutes to walk from the tower of the Aristocrat Academy to the auditorium on the first floor if they walked slowly. Dake was very worried that Deanna would accidentally fall, so he kept holding her hand. Outside the main entrance of the auditorium stood 2 glowing elks. They were both wearing cute Christmas hats on their heads. Dake followed the behavior of the senior in front of him, and took off the Christmas hat of an elk. Sure enough, another Christmas hat spun down from the top of its head and landed steadily on the elk's head. This seemingly simple scene actually contained an extremely powerful technique. Dake sighed in his heart and put the Christmas hat on Deanna's head. Then he took off another one for himself and put it on. Two first-year students wearing Christmas hats pushed open the door and entered. In an instant, the setting of the entire auditorium came into view. The four iconic long tables in the auditorium were still there. The long tables were covered with red tablecloths embroidered with Christmas trees, elks and sleighs. Silver candlesticks floated above the long tables, but the candles were not lit yet. On the stage in front of them, there was a huge Christmas tree. Big and small gift boxes hung on the Christmas tree, as well as countless decorations. The most eye-catching decorations were a crown, a grimoire, a lance and the Fool tarot card. These were the symbols of the four academies. They were the spirit of the academies. Glowing fairies danced around the Christmas tree and let out bell-like laughter. The atmosphere of the Christmas ball was overflowing. 2-in-1 4,000 words. Chapter 195. According to the arrangement of grades, the senior students sat near the stage, while the first years could only sit at the back. There was a hierarchy between the top and the bottom. This was not just a microcosm of this era. Dake entered the auditorium and found a seat at the long table belonging to the aristocrats. He happily waited for the Christmas ball to begin. During the Halloween ball, he only joined in halfway, so he did not experience this kind of eagerness. In short, it felt good. Dake picked up the teapot on the table, poured the black tea into the teacups, and handed them to Deanna and Lucy one by one. Beside the tea set, there was a freshly baked chocolate chip cookie. Together with the black tea, the aroma was overwhelming. At around 6:50 p.m., suddenly, a large group of people rushed in from the main entrance, and the auditorium instantly became lively. The piano in the corner of the stage automatically played a melodious tune. The professors who stayed in the school also came out from behind the stage and sat in the teachers' seats one after another. The website was https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP. It was obvious that the professors had also dressed up carefully tonight. Professor Kazair was wearing a suit, tie, and leather shoes, like a graceful old gentleman. Professor Shierfu was wearing a light green dress, and a furry scarf was wrapped around her slender neck. Her hair was tied up high, and there was a golden phoenix hairpin entwined with wind elements. Professor Lili was wearing a nightgown and yawning, looking as if she had not woken up yet. It was not until Sister Ka Lien patted her awake that she reluctantly used a disguise card and transformed into a cute and charming little fairy. In addition, there was Bella from the library, Gloria from the teaching room. However, there was no sign of the principal. However, the senior students were already used to it. Principal Erdi's way of thinking was really unimaginably old-fashioned, such as the persistence of appearing last. During the celebration, she was always the last to appear, like the stars that decorated the celebration more and more brightly. By the time he came back to his senses, the four long tables were already filled with people. Dake saw White and Luo boat in front of the Night Academy's table next door. Next to them was Ai Ma. Ai Ma wasn't dressed as formally as Deanna and Luo Si, but it was obvious that she had dressed up meticulously. However, the makeup that she didn't know if it was done by herself only made her look more youthful. She was already younger than her peers to begin with, and now it was even more obvious. His youthful appearance coupled with his stubborn eyes gave him a unique temperament. Dake had a nagging feeling that she was being treated as a Barbie doll by a senior to practice her makeup. She didn't seem to like this makeup, so she kept frowning. A little later, Panduola finally appeared at the entrance. In a ball where everyone was dressed in formal attire, her white muslin dress didn't stand out. However, the exposed collar of her delicate collarbone and her protruding breasts caught people's eyes. She had a smile on her face, and pearl earrings were hanging on her delicate earlobes. Her actions didn't lose their elegance and elegance. What a beautiful person! Will Deanna be this beautiful in the future? Deanna lowered her head and looked at her chest. She felt stable. Luoxi's expression changed slightly. People's physiques couldn't be compared to each other. Perhaps it was because of the difference in their grades. Deanna didn't seem to see Panduola as a competitor. Perhaps even she herself didn't understand why she had such a good impression of Dark. Perhaps she just wanted to be with him, whether it was eating or dancing. Senior Pandora, who came in through the door, swept a glance in the direction of the noble dean's table, and quickly discovered Dark among them. She raised her arm and waved at Dark. She grinned, then turned around and walked towards the long table in the Mage Institute. As her back was gradually blocked by other people, Dake withdrew his gaze. Then he happened to see Victor, who was staring back at him for some reason. White. Luoboat suddenly poked White's waist. White came back to his senses and hurriedly turned his head, but his heart was already in turmoil. Just now senior sister was waving at Dake, right? He asked in a low voice. Ah, which senior sister? Did Panduola pass by? Luoboat didn't notice Panduola at all. White stared blankly for a moment, feeling a little unhappy. Dake didn't understand, but Deanna beside him whispered, Dake, do you like bears? This question didn't have any foreshadowing. Even if Dake wanted to connect the dots, he didn't know where to start. He didn't answer for a long time until Deanna urged him. Bears are so cute, of course I like them. Deanna nodded in satisfaction, then whispered to Luosi beside her. Dake shook his head, wondering if Deanna was talking about a Christmas present. She's not going to give me a stuffed bear, right? That can't be right. Dake's expression changed slightly. The more he thought about it, the more likely it was. That wouldn't be a good present. He'd rather get a toffee. 7 o'clock sharp. As the bell on the clock tower rang, the magic lights in the auditorium suddenly went out. The light disappeared, and darkness enveloped the auditorium. Only the Christmas tree on the stage still emitted a faint glow. The junior students were frightened. The senior students, on the other hand, were calm and collected. Sure enough, 3 seconds later, just as the screams started, the auditorium lit up again. The light source that lit up the auditorium changed from the magic lights to the candles on the silver candlesticks. Thousands of candles were floating in the air, illuminating the auditorium. On the long table covered with a Christmas tablecloth, neatly arranged gold and silver cutlery quietly appeared. The light from the candles shone on the gold plates and silver goblets, reflecting the colorful light. It was like a dream. The first-year students had never experienced such a sudden surprise. After a moment of silence, there was a rush of loud discussion. Shu, Principal Arte, who was wearing a Christmas hat, successfully stepped onto the stage without anyone noticing when light and darkness alternated. She stretched out her hand, and a little fairy wrapped in white light flew into her palm. Then, it suddenly transformed into a reindeer with a long star-like tail. The brown-furred reindeer with huge antlers ran forward, and a sleigh piled with gift bags appeared from the starlight. It ran out from Principal Aerdiai's palm and dragged the sleigh through the air. It ran from the stage all the way through the auditorium, broke through the door, and disappeared into the distance. The starlight scattered from the gift bags on the sleigh fell onto the plates, and turned into turkeys that emitted a strong meaty aroma. The soft belly of the turkey was cut open, and it was full of spices. The grease that slid down the drumstick formed a thin layer on the plates. Dake couldn't help but want to eat. It was rare to have a Christmas ball, so excessive moderation was not advisable. Gluttony only had 60 points, so there was still plenty left. Today is Christmas Eve. Principal Aerdiai's voice was full of seductive magnetism. It's a day to reunite with family. But to me, Shengmalian is my home. Every student here is my family, Wang Chong said. Every Christmas Eve, I will make a wish that I can spend the next Christmas Eve with my family. It seems that my wish from last year has come true again. Principal Aerdiai couldn't help but smile. As a principal, I have a lot to say, but I hope that the rest of the time will be reserved for the ball. I believe that all of you feel the same, right? The audience cheered. Principal Aerdiai opened his arms and embraced the air. Since that's the case, I'll stop here. I wish you all a peaceful Christmas Eve. No matter when or where, peace will be with you, my dear family. As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 long tables lit up with white light at the same time, and the empty plates around the turkeys were suddenly filled with exquisite delicacies. roast meat, lamb chops, sausages, steaks, pudding, potatoes, apple pies, syrup pies, chocolate muffins, donuts, of course. There were also the indispensable beans. Dake glanced at the whole pot of beans in front of him, and couldn't help but recall the time when he first entered the school, and his heart was surging with emotions. Fate came and went, and fate was fate. The piano in the corner of the stage suddenly changed, and the music became cheerful, just like the hearts of the students. As Principal Erdii retreated behind the scenes, the banquet began as scheduled. First, of course, was the usual eating. Only after eating could they talk about other things. The sumptuous food was enough to make people drool. The turkeys were dissected by knives and forks, and the auditorium was filled with the rich aroma of chicken meat. But the most aromatic part was actually the seasoning in the belly of the turkey. Dake didn't think too much and ate as much as he wanted. Gluttony did increase, but it wasn't much. After eating half of the turkey, his eating speed slowed down, and the notification of gluttony +1 disappeared. While drinking juice to help with digestion, Dake looked at Deanna beside him. Occasionally, he would help her cut the meat into smaller pieces and pull the napkin properly to prevent the sauce from getting on her clothes. The atmosphere in the auditorium was getting more and more cheerful. At 7:30, a small magic elf suddenly appeared on the stage, flapping its wings. Then, a clown in a Christmas costume somersaulted into the auditorium, and it attracted a lot of cheers. The magic circus had begun. The entire half-hour magic show pushed the cheerful atmosphere to the extreme. Dake was immersed in such an atmosphere. Other than occasionally thinking about the clown's superb skills, he showed his love for the circus like the rest of the audience. It was really good. Apart from everything else, fun was indeed the soul of a circus. At 8 o'clock sharp, as the Christmas clown left the stage, the students who thought that the show would end there suddenly found a clear spring on the stage. The clear spring water gushed out from the middle of the stage, forming a mushroom shape that was wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. A mermaid wearing shells and pearls suddenly appeared from the bottom of the spring water. With a swing of her long tail, she jumped to the top of the spring water. She sat cross-legged on the spring water, and with a light hug, an elegant harp appeared in her hands. Then her sandalwood ton mouth opened slightly, and the lyrics of a song were sung, long and drawn out. "It's the mermaid, Miss Starluo." The students below the stage suddenly became restless. While Dake was dumbfounded, the surrounding students seemed to have a clearer understanding of the mermaid. He couldn't help but look at Deanna. Deanna looked away. "Don't look at me, Deanna doesn't know." Luosi couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. "That's the famous mermaid singer, Miss Starluo. Her singing is as moving as a lark, and she is very popular in the kingdom. I didn't expect Principal Erdii to prepare such a surprise." Dark. In this era, is it possible for singers to step onto the stage? Luosi shook her head. The rise of musicals has changed a lot, but it's still limited. Miss Starluo is a rare mermaid, so she is treated more respectfully than a human singer. In the end, the nobility of professions and the weight of men and women were all topics that had not changed for a long time. In this era that was approaching the Renaissance, the status of artists had greatly increased, and the rights of women were gradually being protected. The vile slavery system was suppressed by a large number of objections, and workers received wages equal to the labor force. But it was still in the early stages. The mermaid singer wasn't the last surprise. She only sang a song on the stage, and a group of swan people with snow-white wings suddenly flew from the sky, as if angels had descended to earth. The ballet they were rehearsing, Swan Lake, was immediately performed. Princess Ojeda, who was picking flowers by the lake, was cast a vicious spell by the ferocious devil Rothbart, and turned into a beautiful swan. Only when night fell, the princess could temporarily change back to human form. Only unswerving love could break the evil spell. Prince Siegfried, who was wandering around Swan Lake, happened to meet the princess who was in human form. The beast's blood hidden deep in his heart boiled, and he fell in love at first sight. When the prince returned to the castle, he held a ball to choose the future queen. The devil asked his daughter, the Black Swan, to disguise herself as Ojeda to deceive the prince. When the prince and the Black Swan were dancing, Ojeda appeared at the window. She begged the prince to remember his promise to her, but the prince was distracted by the devil's spell. Under the devil's request, the prince made a vow of love to the black swan. The devil's plot succeeded, and Ojeda cried out in despair and left. Suddenly, lightning flashed and thunder roared, and the ballroom was in chaos. The prince came to his senses in despair, but it was too late. He had made another vow of love to someone else. The deceived prince rushed out to find the real Ojeda. The last scene. When the prince returned to Swan Lake, he was heartbroken. The devil created a snowstorm to stop the prince from looking for Ojeda. But the prince finally broke through the snowstorm and found Ojeda. However, infinite love and endless regret could not change the result of breaking the promise. The spell could not be broken, and the prince and the princess were destined to be separated. The devil showed his ferocious face at this time, and turned the princess and her companions into swans floating on the lake. The grieving prince and the queen embraced each other, and jumped into the raging waves of the lake with the belief that they would rather die than love. In an instant, a miracle appeared. Justice defeated evil, and unswerving love defeated the evil devil. The magic was broken. The devil's den collapsed, the lake receded, and the swans were reborn. The prince and the princess bathed in the light of the rising sun, and their beautiful life began again. Although there were many tragic endings in Swan Lake, it was obvious that an unreasonable comedic ending had been chosen here. In the face of the so-called miracle, the powerful devil was defenseless. But no one cared about these loopholes in the logic. The swan's acting skills, thunder and lightning, the snowstorm, and the extremely shocking soundtrack created an incomparable sense of immersion. The audience had no extra time to think about the details. This song, Swan Lake, became the most praised program on Christmas Eve. As the prince and princess happily snuggled up to each other under the stage lights, the 9 o'clock clock quietly rang without anyone noticing. The opera ended, but the prince and the princess did not leave. Instead, they waltzed in the romantic and elegant music. Only then did the students come to their senses. The ball began. Deanna watched Dake stand up. Dake could only give her an apologetic look. Luosi hugged Deanna's arm. Under the confused gaze of the surrounding students, Dake walked to the middle seat of the Magic Engineering School. White, who was excitedly chatting with Luoboat about justice will prevail over evil, suddenly noticed Dake walking in front of him. His expression suddenly stiffened. An ominous premonition floated in his heart. His keen perception as a hero made him realize that things might be developing in a direction that was not favorable to him. He was always able to foresee danger in advance. Luoboat, who was next to him, also saw Dake's figure and asked curiously, "Why is Dake walking over there? Isn't his dance partner Deanna?" White stared at Dake's back and did not answer Luoboat. Sitting in their seats, White was able to see a little of Panduola's back. This was originally something that made him happy, but now it had a bad effect. He tilted his head and saw Panduola standing up from her seat. Then, she stretched out her slender, white, jade-like fingers to the blonde noble youth. Dake took her hand and lowered his head to kiss the back of her hand. The soft touch passed through the white lace and touched the bottom of their hearts. The surrounding fourth-year students of the Magic Engineering School were all shocked and frightened at the same time. Several male students who were eager to ask Pandora to dance with them saw the silver-ranked dragoness accept the first-year student's invitation. She revealed a rare, soul-stirring smile as she walked towards the wide stage to the beat of the music. Many people rubbed their eyes, as if they were dreaming. It was the fourth year. In the past 4 years, the Silver Dragon Princess, who was known as the Iron Wall of the Ball, had never been invited to dance with anyone. But now, she was so willing that she even took the initiative to walk side by side with someone and step onto the stage. Tonight was really a dream start. Dake held Panduola's hand and walked to the stage. Although he had expected this, he was still a little surprised by the stabbing pain on his back. Is this the so-called feeling of having a knife on my back? It's literally. But he didn't know that it wasn't just the boys who were stabbing him. There were also a few girls who were secretly encouraging themselves and preparing to take the initiative to ask him to dance when the ball started. Aima put her hands on the table and used her palms to hold her round face. Through the gaps between people, She saw Deanna sitting across from her. The two girls looked at each other for some reason. Deanna had an idea and immediately raised her chest. She showed a "I'm different from you" attitude. Aima glanced at her. After the last competition in class, she had some thoughts that she didn't quite understand. Then she asked the upperclassmen and was dressed up like a Barbie doll. But the effort she put in for this seemed to be hard to get rewarded. Behind her, in front of the dean's table, Sarah, who was flaunting her confidence, also died before she could win. Her hardcore supporter, Heidi, felt helpless. Her opponent was too strong. As the rhythm of the music changed, more and more couples or couples who had agreed to dance with each other stood up from their seats. With graceful steps, they walked out of the area formed by 4 long tables, and walked towards the crimson-carpeted stage. The Swan Princess and the Human Prince's waltz was so beautiful. Dake and Panduola looked at each other and smiled. They also tiptoed on the stage. The romantic atmosphere of the Christmas ball gradually became more and more intense. Cute little elves shuttled through the crowd and became the best decorations for the ball. The number of people dancing on the stage gradually increased. Gorgeous fireworks bloomed in the sky above their heads one after another. Panduola blinked and approached Dake with dance steps. Dake was forced to step back by her snow-white gaze. The senior sister retracted her toes happily. Dake leaned forward and synchronized with the dance steps. The two spun in a circle and switched positions. The background in their field of vision changed. Dake suddenly noticed Professor Lily drinking wine at the teacher's table. He wondered if he should give him the Christmas gift tonight, or wait until tomorrow. And Professor Shirfa's bottle of wine. Ouch! Dake subconsciously retracted his feet from the sharp pain in his toes. He then noticed Chen Yushan's raised eyebrows. He quickly collected his thoughts and focused on the circle dance. Senior Pandora took advantage of the situation to lean forward and whisper in his ear, "You're right. Do you know how impolite it is to be distracted while dancing with a lady?" Nirvana +1 Dake's ears and eyes turned red. Panduola's eyes flashed with excitement. However, she suddenly felt a strong force on her arm, and her whole body was pulled to the side. She then turned around and fell into Dake's arms in a half-lying position. Dake lowered his head and looked down at Chen Yushan's face. Her slightly powdered face was white with a hint of red. Her long eyelashes exuded a faint seduction. Her bright red lips could make people feel hungry. The small heart-shaped silver scales under the corner of her eyes reflected the stage lights. There was a hint of confusion. 3 in 1 6,000 words, 3 chapters at a time. Chapter 196. Their gazes intertwined for 6 seconds. As the atmosphere became more and more ambiguous, Panduola suddenly exerted her strength and turned around to suppress Dake. The positions of the two sides suddenly changed. Seeing Dake's eyes flash with a trace of surprise, Panduola couldn't help but tease him. In front of Panduola, who could step on a wolf's head and dance under the moon at a very young age, Dake, who skipped the Valkyrie's strength training, couldn't resist at all. Only now did Dake realize that he was just a little lamb exposed to the wolf's mouth. However, he blinked and took the opportunity to turn around and escape from the wolf's mouth. Sure enough, Panduola cooperated. Under his lead, she stepped forward and caught up. Then, with a tap of her toes, she turned 360 degrees and weakly fell down again. Dake reached out and grabbed her waist. The lower edge of her chest entered his field of vision, showing her expanding vitality. Remember the URL. MVIP, can't you? VIP. The music suddenly stopped. Panduola rolled along Dake's arm, and suddenly stood up with her body pressed against his chest. The song ended. When Dake and Panduola walked off the stage side by side, the tableware on the 4 long tables had been cleared and replaced with brand new drinks and pastries. There was no longer a seating arrangement for the Christmas ball. Everyone could move around freely. Panduola seemed to be satisfied with the interaction of the song. She slightly lifted her skirt and walked out of the auditorium with Dake. The two tacitly didn't say anything. It wasn't until they went around a wall and couldn't see the lights of the ball anymore that they sat down on a stone bench. Panduola looked up at the Christmas night sky. Unexpectedly, a blush appeared on her cheeks. Although she acted like she had a lot of experience, tonight was actually her first time dancing with someone. Fortunately, she had secretly practiced the circle dance in the past. So one song was enough. What if she accidentally exposed herself after dancing a few more times? It wasn't easy for him to maintain his image. After a while she said, "Thank you. This is the best Christmas present I've ever received." Dake was slightly taken aback, as if he didn't expect this to be the first thing he said after coming out. But then he smiled and said, "This is not a Christmas present. Panduola. In my heart this is it." All right. Dake looked at the night sky helplessly. Perhaps all outstanding people had their own stubborn sides. It was unknown where the moon was hidden tonight. The sky was clear as if it had been washed clean. Only fragments of starlight shone down. The two of them chatted quietly for a while before Dake asked curiously, "Senior, are you going out tomorrow?" Panduola shook his head. "Tonight." Dake was a little surprised. "In such a hurry?" Panduola smiled and said, "It's a bit far away. Maybe I'll need to apply for leave when school starts." Dake, I see. Then the Christmas present that he originally wanted to give after midnight would have to be brought forward. He thought for a while and got up. "Let's take a walk upstairs?" Panduola turned her head and saw that there were already people appearing one after another. This place was no longer hidden. She got up as well. The two of them chatted as they went up the stairs. Then they came to the window on the third floor of the castle. After coming here several times, Dake found that this was indeed a good view. Lying on the windowsill, he could not only see the night sky and the clock tower, but also the external bridge where a lot of things had happened. He clapped his hands and asked, "Can you summon your familiar?" Although Panduola didn't understand, she still took out her school card and summoned her familiar. Her familiar, which was the little dragon with wings, was called a young winged dragon. It was a type of winged dragon that would never grow up. Dake picked up the familiar, which was as big as the little demon beast, and raised it high. Although the young winged dragon flapped its wings happily, it was only the reaction of a familiar. Under normal circumstances, a familiar only had an intelligence level of 2.5, which was half a level higher than a magic fairy. They belonged to the mid-range simulacrum, and like a normal golem, they didn't have a complete and independent thinking circuit. So at first glance, they seemed to be alive, but as long as one interacted with them for a long time, they would realize that they were just artificial creatures. "Can you turn around?" Dake looked at Panduola and asked again. Panduola looked more and more confused, but because of her trust in Dake, she still turned around. Dake pursed his lips slightly and took out Pride Eye from the card bag he carried with him. This was the first time he used the Great Sin series card on someone else's familiar, magic fairy, so he couldn't confirm the effect. According to the original plan, if the effect wasn't satisfactory, he would change the Christmas present. So at this time he didn't mention the word Christmas present to Panduola. Fortunately, Panduola was cooperative enough, which also saved him a lot of effort. He didn't hold Pride Eye in front of him, but hid it behind his back. The Magister had a sense for the magic cards he personally made. As long as he injected a trace of magic power, he would be able to distinguish the type of magic card in an instant when he received feedback. He began to chant the usual summoning spell. For seconds later, a dark golden ball of light drilled out of Pride Eye and slowly floated toward the young winged dragon he was holding with his other hand. The young winged dragon looked at the ball of light with wide eyes, without any sense of danger. Until the ball of light drilled into its head, it seemed to have short-circuited and suddenly stopped reacting. Then it suddenly opened its eyes, and a dark golden light bloomed from its eyes. Its slightly stiff facial expression suddenly came to life. Almost in the next moment, it bit Dake's finger. Hiss! Dake felt a sharp pain and quickly let go. The young winged dragon abruptly flew to a high place and cried out, "Ee-ya-ya!" Panduola finally couldn't help but ask, "Can you turn around?" Dake stuffed Pride Eye back into the card bag and said, "Yes." Panduola got the permission, and immediately turned around. The young winged dragon that was bossing Dark around suddenly felt a terrifying pressure that seemed to be able to crush it into mud in an instant. That was the suppression of the biological level. It was the absolute dominance of the superior over the inferior. At this moment, the pride provided by Pride Eye could no longer support it to continue holding its head high. It suddenly retracted its tail, turned its head shakily like a tiny lizard, and faced its master. But it was such a humble but real reaction that made Panduola's brows turn from cloudy to clear in an instant. No one understood the demonic spirit better than the master of the demonic spirit. She almost immediately felt the change in the young winged dragon. It was a change that she had often dreamt of when she first summoned her familiar. The cute young winged dragon turned from a demonic spirit into a real creature, and became her first family, accompanying her day after day. But as her knowledge of magic became richer, she gradually understood that it was impossible. A demonic spirit was a demonic spirit after all, not a family. The intelligence level of a demonic spirit seemed to be half a level higher than that of a magic elf, but that was almost the limit. It was impossible to break through in terms of hardware. Mental magi could form a bond with magic elves, but they couldn't form a bond with a demonic spirit. This made her life very difficult during that time. It wasn't until Ms. Bella noticed that her condition wasn't right, and took the initiative to contact her, that she was lucky enough to find her first family. But now, the dream from 3 years ago seemed to have come true in front of her. She blinked and showed a rare cute expression. Roar! The young winged dragon's last arrogance made it spit out a flame-like dragon breath into the sky. It seemed to want to declare its nobility through this performance. But as the flames scattered like fireworks, its nobility was still incomprehensible. Panduola saw that the demonic spirit, which theoretically had no attack power at all, actually used a skill. At this moment, she suddenly understood the reason why Dake made the curse cage. Maybe I also need a curse cage. Panduola was always used to hiding her overly intense emotions in the bottom of her heart, but she was really excited at this moment. She had just received the best Christmas present. In the blink of an eye, she had broken the record again. She couldn't help but look at Dake. How many surprises would this first-year junior bring her before she would stop? As the surface effect of Pride Eye faded, the young winged dragon finally returned to normal. But its intelligence had been awakened, and it had a complete self-consciousness. Panduola teased the young winged dragon lovingly, using her slender fingers to tease its pink tongue. Her mood was extremely happy. If Dake confessed to her now, she might be happy and say yes. Right, I have to give him a gift in return. Panduola racked her brain to think. Although the Christmas present she originally prepared was very thoughtful, compared to Dake's surprise, it was completely not enough. Or I'll give that. She quickly had an idea. Dake, turn around. Ah. Dake didn't expect it to be his turn so soon. He simply turned around and leaned on the windowsill to look down. The external bridge, as far as the eye could see, was indeed a sacred place for dating. In just a short while, there were already 2 pairs of men and women on the bridge. They were one-on-one, and neither of them interfered. They were all whispering and full of affection. Dake looked and thought of the Marine Order that he hadn't seen for a long time. He wondered if those people had recovered. There were a total of 16 people in the Marine Order. Except for Mr. Haixing, who was expelled, the other 15 people were still in school. The school didn't announce their identities, and they were also regarded as victims in the public announcement. In fact, it was the same. They were more or less brainwashed by the moon goddess statue. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done those things. After the whole incident was over, the remaining 15 members of the Marine Order returned to their normal school life. Dake also saw the squid Seakeet more than once. Seakeet was no longer as gloomy as before. Apart from avoiding him when he saw him, his communication with the other students in the same grade was quite smooth. However, Dake didn't know that the Marine Order hadn't been disbanded. The 15 members were still secretly communicating with each other. But in nature, they had changed from a conspiratorial order to a society-like organization. They gathered once a week to complain to each other and relieve their stress. Professor Shi-Erfus secretly observed them. After confirming that they weren't harmful, he let them go. Okay. Panduola's clear voice came from behind him. Dake guessed what kind of surprise it would be, and slowly turned around. Instead, he saw senior sister Pandora, who was dressed in pure white, hiding her hands behind her back and looking at him playfully. The young winged dragon, who had just gained sentience, was lying on her shoulder obediently. Here, your Christmas present. After seeing Dake turn around, Pandoola stretched out her hand from behind her and spread her 5 fingers in front of him. Okay. Dake took a closer look and found that there was a fingernail-sized crescent-shaped silver scale lying quietly in her palm. He couldn't help but ask, "What is this?" Pandoola. The dragon's reverse scale. A dragon had a reverse scale. Touching it would infuriate it. This was because the reverse scale was the only soft scale on a dragon's entire body. A large number of nerves grew inside the reverse scale, and the surface was covered with sensors. It was abnormally sensitive. Whether it was the sense of touch, pain, or other senses, it could be magnified several times. This was one of the most important treasures of a dragon. After every dragon shed their skin, even if they threw away all of their dragon skin and scales, they wouldn't leave behind their reverse scale. Therefore, the rarity of a reverse scale far exceeded that of an ordinary dragon's scale. In a sense, this was indeed a precious gift that could be compared to Dake's surprise. Dake stretched out 2 fingers and pinched the dragon's scale, observing it carefully. Of course, this was the first time he saw something like a dragon's scale, not to mention the reverse scale of a dragon's scale. The reverse scale itself wasn't as cold as ordinary scales, and it was slightly soft to the touch. It was said that in history, there was a soft sword that was completely made of a reverse scale. It was light, soft, and indestructible. However, Dake's first thought was that there were millions of dragon breeds or dragon elemental magical spirits. Could he use this dragon's reverse scale as the core material to refine a powerful dragon? In his mind, he didn't consider this silver-white reverse scale as a collector's item. How is it? My Christmas present is sincere enough, right? Pandoola teased when she saw how serious he was. Dake was excited. He mimicked Pandoola's tone and said, "Of course, this is the best Christmas present I've ever received." Pandoola covered her mouth and chuckled. "I hope an even better present won't appear immediately." Dake took out a square handkerchief from his card bag and carefully wrapped the reverse scale before putting it in his card bag. After exchanging Christmas presents, the 2 young men and women leaned against the wall and chatted in low voices. Pandoola was very knowledgeable. No matter what she said, it was clear and logical. If he wasn't careful, he couldn't stop. When Dake came back to his senses, it was already 10:30 p.m. Pandoola saw that he was constantly looking at the clock tower, so she said, "Do you want to go back to the hall first? You seem to have another appointment?" 2 in 1 for 1,000 words. It's the end of the month. Give me all the backlog. It's the last day of the bounty. If I don't give it away today, it'll expire. Make it to the top 10. Chapter 197. Pandoola's question was actually quite casual. She didn't care whether Dake had a date or not. Although they got along well, it wasn't to the extent that they needed to care about this. Dake was so outstanding. It would be strange if no one invited him to the Christmas ball. He probably turned down countless invitations to fulfill his promise to her, right? Pandoola could guess it with just a little guess. However, some people and some things couldn't be avoided. For example, Deanna, who always hung around Dake. Thinking about it, he still had to deal with that clingy little vixen in the second half of the ball. How pitiful. Remember, https://m, Vip can't you? Vip in the face of Pandoola's question. Dake didn't hide it. Yes, I have to dance with Deanna later. This was obviously a plus. Women were especially concerned about a man lying to them for another woman, even if the 2 parties didn't have a deep relationship. Pandoola smiled and said, "Then let's go back. I'm actually a little cold." The dress she was wearing wasn't a thermal one. Once she stopped, she would feel cold. It was just that they were chatting happily and didn't pay attention to it. Dake couldn't help but show a hint of apology. "It's my negligence." Pandoola raised her hand as if she wanted to touch his forehead, but she stopped halfway and nodded. "Don't say it like you're taking care of me. I'm a senior." "Okay, senior." Dake raised his arm and emptied it. Pandoola took advantage of the situation and held his arm as they prepared to go downstairs. When they returned to the auditorium, At least 1/3 of the people inside were gone. Not all of them were couples. Some people couldn't stand the atmosphere of the ball and wanted to go out for a walk. Then, they would often inadvertently eat dog food and choke on it. Some people would take advantage of the atmosphere to ask the person they liked out to confess. If they succeeded, they probably wouldn't come back. If they didn't, they probably wouldn't come back. The tranquility outside the auditorium was like a demon with its mouth wide open, swallowing and digesting the students one by one. But if you think that the auditorium will be peaceful, then you are obviously wrong. Inside, there would only be more dog food. The first half of the dance party was from 9 to 10. The second half was from 11 p.m. to 12 p.m. As for the 1 hour between the two rounds, it was more casual. If she liked it, she could go on stage alone and tap dance or something. Of course, most people would find a corner below the stage to eat and drink while laughing and chatting. However, there were also those who were unsettled and couldn't find any joy in it. The white Gouda was one of them. He and Luoboat placed a piece of magic chess on the table, with a few students watching from the side. However, White kept making mistakes during the game. He would always be distracted when there was movement at the door. Obviously, his mind was not on the magic chess at all. Luoboat felt that White's chess skills were plummeting. He was very disappointed with his friend who didn't take magic chess seriously. When White made another extremely bad mistake, Luoboat finally couldn't help but criticize him. Magic chess has a soul. If your heart isn't here, then don't play. It was the first time that White was criticized by Luoboat, and he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. He withdrew his hand and sighed. I want to be alone. Luoboat shook his head. Don't be so nervous, White. There's a 3-year gap between them. White wanted to agree with him for a moment, but when he remembered that he was also part of the 3-year gap group, he couldn't help but be speechless again. He spent most of the first Christmas dance in his life worrying about gains and losses. It wasn't until the second half of the dance was about to start that White finally saw Panduola and Dake walk in through the front door. The two followed etiquette and held hands. Dake was dressed in black, and Panduola was dressed in white. It was an unusual match. But White noticed the difference in height between the two, which made him feel a little relieved. He had heard more than once that girls didn't like boys who were shorter than them. Maybe the relationship between Panduola and Dake was slightly different from what he thought? Just like Luoboat said, I shouldn't keep thinking about the worst. White patted his cheeks to wake himself up. Then he saw Dake and Panduola find Deanna and Luosi. Panduola sat down on the other side of Luosi. Dake sat on the other side of Deanna. The four of them sat side by side. Deanna was happy when she saw Dake come back. Luosi was reserved when Panduola sat down. Panduola took the initiative to reach out her hand and said, Hello, I am Panduola Doragon, 4th year of the School of Magic. Luosi quickly shook her hand and introduced herself. Luosi Flotty, 1st year of the School of Aristocrats. Deanna didn't want to be outdone and said, And me Deanna Greatbear, 1st year of the School of Aristocrats. And so the three of them got to know each other. It was hard to imagine how isolated and unsociable Panduola used to be from this scene. She had grown a lot in 3 years. This was thanks to Bella's care, and also because her job as a librarian gave her the opportunity to interact with people. The current her. She didn't usually like to talk to people, but she had become very talkative. Thus, after a few words, she started chatting with the two girls. Deanna was a sociable person, and soon forgot the estrangement. She asked the question that she had been holding back for a long time. Senior, where did you go? Panduola knew that she was asking about her and Dake's whereabouts, so she said, We sat outside for a while, and then stood on the 3rd floor where we could see the bridge. Deanna, that's it. Panduola smiled gently. What else? Deanna, no, nothing else. Luosi was sandwiched in the middle, with 3 lines on her forehead. Soon. It was 11 o'clock. The second half of the dance started with the sound of the piano. Deanna jumped up excitedly. Next, it's Deanna's turn. Dake, who had been listening from the side, slowly stood up. He felt a little helpless about Deanna's energy. In fact, he was already a little tired. But he still let Deanna hold his arm and walk towards the stage. There were many students who were waiting for this moment. Almost at the same time, pairs of students stepped onto the stage. Deanna's excitement was beyond words. She could feel that the atmosphere this time was different from the one on Halloween. Because of the separation between the first half and the second half, the feeling of taking over was less. She seemed to be affected by the atmosphere, and her cheeks were slightly flushed. Her hand that was holding Dake's hand was trembling. She was nervous. This meant that she cared more about dancing with Dake than she did on Halloween. Sometimes, being together all the time would make people tired of each other. But sometimes, being together all the time would make people gradually obsess with each other, as they got to know each other better. Deanna obviously belonged to the latter category. Her innocent little thoughts were obvious to see. Dark tried his best to guide her on the correct dance steps, but the thin heels under her feet were a hindrance. After that, Dake didn't care about the dance steps. Instead, he slowly turned in circles with Deanna's rhythm. Deanna had a lively personality, but when she danced, she was very slow. Time quietly slipped away from her like water. The two of them gradually got some feeling in the slow and leisurely dance steps. After one song, another song followed. After 3 songs, Deanna's dance steps were seriously out of shape. Her thin high heels looked like they could break at any time. Dake let her off the stage. He gave the stage to someone who needed it more. Deanna gradually came back to her senses as she walked off the stage. In addition to excitement, there was also endless aftertaste in her eyes. Tonight's Christmas ball would definitely leave the most important mark in her memory. The two of them returned to their previous seats. Deanna had a satisfied look on her face as she played with Luosi. Dake looked past them and connected with Panduola. He saw the words, "Thank you for your hard work." Actually, it wasn't that hard. If Deanna could change her high heels, he might be immersed in the slow dance steps where he felt the passage of time. It was really a different mood. After sitting down this time, Dake thought that he could rest for a long time. Unexpectedly, it didn't take long before he saw another girl walking towards him. It was Aima. She lowered her head and moved her lips quickly. If they were close enough, they should be able to hear her complaining. "It took me so much effort to put on makeup. Wouldn't it be a loss if I don't use it? Just once. If I'm rejected, there won't be a next time." She was shy and didn't have her usual clean and straightforward manner. Panduola glanced at Dake. "Your business is here again." Dake scratched his head. This was another dance that he had to do. "Don't get me wrong. I just want to try dancing at the Christmas ball, but I can't find a suitable dance partner." Aima pouted. Dake smiled and said, "Okay, miss. It's my honor to be chosen by you." Then, the two of them stepped onto the stage at the same time. Without the Swan Princess and the Human Prince, the second half of the ball felt like something was missing. However, this didn't stop the students from being immersed in it. Aima's dance steps were very standard, as if they were a template. Dake followed her wishes and finished the song. When the song ended, Aima's heart was in turmoil. She wanted to dance again, but she didn't want to trouble the other party too much. Just as she was thinking about this, Dake had already walked off the stage. The second half of the ball came to an end in the blink of an eye. After Aima walked off the stage, it seemed like a big stone in her heart was suddenly lifted. She didn't return to the crowd of the Knights Institute. Instead, she sat down on the other side of Dake. The clock at 12 quietly came and went as they chatted. Dong. Unknowingly, Christmas Eve passed. When the solemn clock rang, couples nestled in the corners, lovers who were crying in the shadows, and boys and girls who were leisurely taking a stroll returned to the auditorium one after another. After Principal Erdii stepped onto the stage, the last program of the Christmas ball officially began. Little fairies flew out of her hand and delivered various Christmas socks to everyone's hands. This was the unique wishing device of the Academy. It was said that if you could hold it in until 5 in the morning on Christmas Day, you could receive this year's Christmas gift. It was usually very surprising. Dake looked at the zebra-striped sock in his hand and resisted the urge to immediately open it. "It's about time." Panduola shook the sock in her hand and said to Dake, "I have to go." Dake blurted out, "I'll send you off." There was no extra speech, and the Christmas ball ended just like that. The students who received their socks walked out of the auditorium one after another. Many of them had endured until now, and were actually quite tired. If they could return to their beds, they would definitely fall asleep. Dake also felt physically and mentally exhausted, but he still insisted on sending Panduola back to the Mage Academy. Have a safe trip. Looking at Panduola running across the bridge, Dake took a deep breath. The winter night air was very cold, and it was as cold as ice. Panduola suddenly turned around and said, "See you in the new semester." "See you." Dake waved his hand and turned around to leave. On the way back, Deanna and Luosi, who were waiting by the wall, met up with him. Dake's face showed a hint of a shy smile and he said softly, "Let's go." Deanna and Luosi giggled and moved to his two sides. The three of them walked together to the tower of the noble house. Back to when the clock was just about to strike 12. In the depths of the secret passage, in an unknown place. Unknowingly, a blood magic array had been drawn on the ground. Countless bats rushed towards the magic array like a swarm of bees. One after another, they crashed into the magic array, and even the blood that splashed out was swallowed by the magic array. Then a blood-red light emerged from the magic array. After 12, it was Christmas. It was the time when the saint was born. It was the time when all living things came back to life. Everything was going on quietly. In the beginning, it was a bat that entered the secret passage. That bat wasn't the boss of the Halloween event, the Vampire Count. It was only one of his 10 million incarnations. In theory, the Vampire Count could be reborn in any bat's body. This was the most troublesome part about it, and the main reason why no one was able to catch it during the event. But at the moment the event ended, the Vampire Count had already disappeared. Its original form was a one-time use magic elf card, which was the masterpiece of Professor Kazair. It was impossible for it to cause any residual damage. With the destruction of the Vampire Count, all his bat incarnations disappeared one by one. Except for the bat that entered the secret passage by mistake. It was the only bat that survived. The reason for its survival was unknown. But since it didn't disappear, it meant that it was no longer an ordinary creature. After that, the news of the secret passage spread. Groups of students rushed into the secret passage. The lower grades who lacked awareness became its target. The students who were bitten by it became tired, which also led to the students being late. The bat that succeeded in sucking the blood of the students changed. It gradually learned to split and atomize, and more bats appeared in the secret passage. Everything developed to this point. The bats even absorbed the blood of the hero's son. The final change was also caused by this. The bats that absorbed the blood of the white turned from predatory creatures to vampires with true self-awareness. They recovered some fragmented memories. Dong. When the clock struck 12, a human body dripping with blood drilled out of the blood magic formation. When the Dake trio returned to the dormitory, White Gouda was still outside. He and Luo Boat had a bit of a quarrel, so they didn't return to the dormitory together after the dance party. White walked alone in the castle and subconsciously stayed outside. There was no curfew during the holidays. The golem wouldn't give him a warning. It didn't matter even if he strolled around until 1 or 2 o'clock. He gradually walked to the familiar external bridge. It was here that he had awakened the pink mist sleeping into the abyss. He couldn't help but take out Taboo Love. He looked at the blurry human body on the card, and wanted to transform the human body into Panduola's appearance like how he used the flower card. But as he injected magic power, the human body began to change shape. He retracted his finger. It was meaningless. It was meaningless to do this. On the contrary, he felt a sense of sadness. He remembered that he had wanted to use Taboo Love to check the favorability of Panduola a long time ago. But for various reasons he hadn't been able to do it. So much so that he had almost forgotten about it. I'll find a way to peek after I give her the Christmas present. After all, I gave her a present, so her favorability shouldn't be too bad. Thinking about it, White became more and more depressed. In the second half of the dance party, he could summon up the courage to ask Panduola to dance with him, but in the end he could only watch. And Dake Dimung. He obviously got the chance to dance with Panduola, but he still wasn't satisfied. He even invited other girls to dance in the second half of the dance party. That was so enviable. So despicable. White was indignant. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't have any alcohol, he would have quickly evolved into a drunkard. His emotions gradually accumulated to the extreme. White leaned on the railing of the bridge and roared at the sky. Unknowingly, when he stopped to catch his breath, a hand was placed on his shoulder. Noble House Tower. After dark returned to the dormitory. He endured the mental exhaustion and washed up. After that, he lay down in the bathtub and fell asleep. Half an hour later, he was suddenly awakened by the cold. He quickly got up, took a shower, and crawled into the warm bed. Early the next morning, Dake slept until he woke up naturally. He stared at the clock on the opposite wall for a long time before he said, "It's Christmas. It's Christmas. I wonder how senior sister Pandora is doing after rushing through the night? How did Claire and Yvette spend Christmas Eve last night?" After clearing his thoughts, Dake suddenly remembered the Christmas stocking hanging at the end of his bed. Even though he knew that there wouldn't be anything too expensive in the stocking, Dake still opened it with anticipation. The surprise of opening a treasure chest only came from the process of unlocking it. There was actually an apple in Dake's Christmas stocking. "Christmas Eve is already over. Why are you still giving me an apple?" However, this disposable Christmas stocking could be kept as a collector's item. Woo, after being awakened by Dake's actions, the little devil suddenly jumped up after a short moment of confusion. "Damn it, it's Christmas. Great little devil, you actually forgot that it's Christmas today." It crawled out of the bed, flapped its wings, and flew to the corner full of presents. After waiting for so long, it was finally time to open the presents. Since it would look at it once or twice a day, the little fiendish magical beast was very clear about the location of its Christmas present. It directly grabbed the gift box with its claws, dragged it outside, and tore the packaging open in a few seconds. Then it closed its eyes and prayed for a while before it tore the packaging open. Suddenly, a thick coffee-colored scarf appeared in its field of vision. The little devil used its claws to grab the scarf, then flew in front of Dake, pointed at the scarf with its other claws, and stared at Dake eagerly. Dake took out the apple from the Christmas stocking and placed it on the table, then turned around and took the scarf from the little devil's claws. Using the base of the little devil's wings as a support, he wrapped the scarf around its chin. Although wearing the scarf like this would cause inconvenience on its wings, the little devil clearly preferred the scarf and didn't care about the inconvenience on its wings at all. It began to wear the scarf and walk in front of the kitty grass, foxgrass, and milkweed, walking in circles like an old general showing off a new sword in his hand. "Okay, stop fooling around." Dark stretched out his hand from behind and picked up the little demonic beast. "Next, the task of delivering the chocolate will be left to you." After the little devil heard the order, not only did it not reject, but its eyes lit up and it nodded. "No problem, leave it to me." This was obviously a good opportunity to show off the scarf. In addition to the chocolate gift box for each of the Noble Academy students, Dake had a lot of gifts to give. He wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he ate breakfast in the dormitory, rested for a while, and then went out. It was already 8 o'clock in the morning. If he knocked on the door at this time, most people would be awake. In Dake's hand was the Christmas candy gift bag that he bought from the candy store last time, the beautifully packaged signed edition of Claire's Weekly Travels, and the button eyes of a teddy bear. He quickly came to Deanna's dormitory door and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" Deanna was half sitting on the bed. She was just woken up by the little devil who came to give her the chocolate gift box. She wanted to go back to sleep. When she finally opened the door with difficulty, it was already a few minutes later. Dake." Deanna, who was only wearing her teddy bear pajamas, subconsciously wanted to close the door. But Dake stuck out a foot and blocked the door. He squinted his eyes and looked at Deanna, and teased. "The sun is already shining on your butt, still not getting up?" "Deanna, I can't get up." 3 in 1 6,000 words plus 3 chapters. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.